Hey guys, tonight we're stepping through a narrow canyon glowing with the last light of day, walls towering on both sides like ancient stone flames. You feel the cool breath of wind swirl around your ankles, bringing with it a whisper of forgotten traders, camel caravans, and dusty coins exchanged in secret. You're entering Petra, the rose-red city half as old as time, carved into the cliffs of Jordan by a people who knew how to make the desert bloom. The entrance? A slit in the rock called the Sick, a winding, natural corridor almost a mile long. It hugs you close with walls that shift color from ochre to scarlet as the light changes. Water channels run beside your feet, carved thousands of years ago by hands that knew how to harness every last drop. You're walking where incense caravans once plodded, bringing frankincense and myrrh from Arabia to the markets of Rome. Your heart pounds a little, maybe from the history, maybe from the echo of your own footsteps. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first few steps into the Sick, and it's like nature and architecture had a secret baby. The floor underfoot is worn smooth, but the walls still bear ancient carvings, niches where gods once sat, and faint hoof marks from long-gone caravans. The Nabateans didn't just use the canyon for dramatic effect, it was protection. The Sick twists and narrows, perfect for bottlenecking invaders. You can't help but imagine a bunch of startled Romans stuck in here, spears clattering, wondering if the cliffs are watching. The air smells of dust and limestone, and a distant trill, maybe a bird, maybe something older, fades behind you. The light dims as the canyon deepens. You glance up. The sky's now just a sliver above you, like a slice of moon fallen sideways, and then, without warning, you see it. The canyon opens like a curtain, and there it is, Osna, the treasury. It doesn't look real. It looks like something the gods downloaded directly into the cliff. Towering columns, intricate facades, all chiseled from a single, unbroken wall of sandstone. It catches the sunlight just right, like it's glowing from within. You stop breathing for a moment, not from fear, from awe. Historians still argue whether this was a royal tomb or something stranger. Some say it housed the treasure of pharaohs. Others believe it was a sacred crypt or maybe a place for rituals no one dares repeat. And a few? Well, they think it was a trap for grave robbers. Fake doors, false chambers, Indiana Jones-style booby traps minus the rolling boulders. One thing's for sure, if you came here without context, you'd swear it was a temple, or a palace, or maybe both. You move closer and here's the kicker. It's not built, it's carved. Every column, every ledge, every detail etched straight into the stone, from top to bottom. That's some next-level dedication, especially considering they didn't exactly have jackhammers or cherry pickers. Now take a second and look at the bullet scars. Yep, those aren't natural. For centuries, people believed the urn at the top contained hidden gold. So naturally, they tried to shoot it open. Result? No gold. Just a very dented urn. Welcome to human decision-making. It's quiet here. Too quiet. And if you press your hand against the stone, it's still warm from the day's sun, like it remembers everything it's ever seen. Traders, kings, camels, goats, maybe even you. You wander past the treasury into the heart of Petra. This wasn't just a stopover. It was a city, a hub, the Vegas of the Incense Road. People came here to sell spices, buy textiles, maybe even do a little spiritual soul-searching on the side. It's hard to picture that now, surrounded by silence, but listen carefully. You can almost hear the jingle of camel harnesses, the mutter of barter, the clang of a dropped bronze coin. The treasury is just the start, a statement piece. Like someone saying, "Oh, you made it through the canyon? Cool. Welcome to this." The sun's dipping low now, and the stone shifts color. You watch the facade move from coral to salmon to deep rust. The shadows lengthen, and you can almost see someone in a robe sweeping past with a basket of dates. In your pocket, maybe some of those dates too. Dry, sticky, but sweet, the flavor of travel. A small cat slips past your feet and vanishes into the dark. Not a magical cat, probably. But the way it moves, it's like even the animals know this place hums with secrets. By now your feet are dusted red, your mind's buzzing, and that first glimpse of the city, Well, you'll carry it with you like a talisman. One last thing before we go further. Look back. Yeah, turn around. See the sick behind you? The way it narrows and hides the city completely? That was no accident. It's like Petra was built to be a surprise every time. Even if you saw it 100 times, that reveal, boom, right through the slot canyon is pure drama. Get ready. The city gets deeper, stranger, and more alive with every step. Word count. After Section 1 awaiting continue. You ease further into Petra, the echoes of your footsteps softening as you pass the treasury's towering shadow. The canyon opens wider now. You're no longer tightly held between the cliffs. Instead, the space around you breathes. And with each slow step, you start to notice them. Doorways. Dozens of them. Some carved high into the rock, others tucked close to the ground. But none of them have doors. These are the facades of tombs and buildings worn down by centuries of sand-laden winds. And they're not all grand, not like the treasury. Some are modest. Others look like practice runs, as if some Nabatean apprentice chiseled a little too enthusiastically and had to start again. But up ahead is a building that makes your eyes widen again. Theater seats carved directly into the slope of a mountain, semicircular and ancient, just waiting for an audience. Here's the thing. This place wasn't just for the dead. Petra was a living, breathing city. A city with trade, politics, drama, and yes, gossip. You round the curve and suddenly feel the shift in energy. You're stepping into the heart of what was once the Nabatean market district. The ground flattens out a bit and there's more open space. That faint crunch under your shoes, it might have been incense dust a couple millennia ago, or goat poop. Could go either way. Picture it. A labyrinth of market stalls, colorful awnings flapping in the dry breeze, vendors yelling over one another in a medley of languages, Aramaic, Arabic, Greek, even bits of Latin and Hebrew. You can almost smell the mingling scents, burning frankincense, fresh-baked flatbread, spiced wine, maybe a touch too much camel sweat. Merchants sat cross-legged with gleaming eyes, hawking pearls, rare dyes, and cinnamon so expensive it might as well have been powdered moonlight. The Nabateans didn't just passively sit in the middle of these trade routes, they owned them. They were masters of logistics. They knew how to guard a caravan, how to stock an oasis, and most importantly, how to make travelers feel just safe enough to spend all their money. Think of them like the desert's Amazon Prime, reliable, wide-reaching, but with better fashion. A mainstream historical fact that blows minds? At their peak, the Nabateans were so successful that the Roman Empire basically had to either work with them or try to absorb them. And the Romans hated being outdone. Petra's marketplace was a direct result of this booming control over the spice and incense trade. Aromatic resins from Arabia, silks from China, gold from Africa, all funneled through Petra. You could say it was the original global checkout cart. But it wasn't all perfume and profit. There's evidence of a black market vibe too. Traders using coded language, secret passageways, or goods hidden in false bottom baskets. And yes, there were taxes. Even ancient customs officers had to eat. The Nabateans were clever, and they charged for access to their water, their roads, and even their storage. If you wanted in on the Petra marketplace, you paid. Historians still argue whether the market was controlled centrally or more like a guild system. Were there Nabatean permits and merchant unions? Or was it an open-for-all bazaar, as long as you played nice? The lack of detailed written records keeps archaeologists guessing and dreaming. You stop and lean against one of the weather-worn columns. There's a faint groove in the stone here, where people have idly traced their fingers for centuries. It's oddly comforting, like you're part of a long human chain just standing around, waiting for your dried figs or embroidered sandals. Suddenly, something catches your eye. A carved stone face half swallowed by the wall. It's not labeled, not famous. Just a hint of someone who once mattered. Maybe a merchant, maybe a god. Hard to tell. A local legend whispers that during the heyday of the Petra marketplace, one Nabatean trader became so rich that he built a secret tunnel from his house to the market, just so he could avoid the riffraff of the street. Of course, no one's found this tunnel, yet. As you wander past the marketplace zone, your eye catches more peculiar details, like stone bowls carved into the walls, likely used to hold oil lamps. When night fell, this place would have glowed like a row of golden fireflies. And imagine the drama after dark. Secret trysts behind the pillars, stolen goods passed hand to hand, and travelers whispering maps in each other's ears. You pass a few stone benches, probably used by tired feet or fussy children. And behind them, a high, half-collapsed archway, its lintels still etched with faint swirls and vines. Another small sign of pride, craftsmanship, and a craving for beauty even in the mundane. And here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeologists once found the fossilized remains of dried dates in an ancient Nabatean stall, perfectly preserved. Apparently, the merchant packed up everything except the fruit. Either he forgot, or someone had a sweet tooth emergency. Time here is weird. It feels like the past and present bump into each other like distracted tourists. One moment you're imagining camel caravans, the next you're wondering where to get a bottle of water. Petra has a way of folding you into its rhythms. By now, you've walked a good stretch. You glance up at the cliffs that hem you in on both sides. The sun has dipped a bit lower, and the rose-colored stone now blushes with lavender hues. You sit for a moment on a chunk of fallen masonry. Maybe it was once part of a colonnade, maybe just a decorative ledge. Either way, it makes a decent seat. The wind picks up. It carries the hush of old conversations and the hint of something roasting nearby. Goat, if you had to guess. You stretch your legs, dust off your palms, and keep walking. The city isn't done with you yet. The sound comes first, soft jingling, rhythmic and slow. Then the voice, low, gravelly, calling out prices you can't quite catch. As you move deeper into the city, you step into what would have once been Petra's bustling commercial heart, alive with traders, bartering, and of course, a bit of friendly swindling. Camel bells jingle in your mind's ear, and you almost expect one to nudge you from behind, demanding a date or two. You're walking through what was likely the market square, or at least one of them, flat stone underfoot, crumbled column bases like broken chess pieces scattered across the ground. The layout still hints at neat rows of stalls and vendor areas, and despite the centuries of silence, you can almost hear the yells, fresh olives, not yesterday's. Silk from beyond the desert, feel it for yourself, careful, that's real myrrh, you break it, you bought it. In the distance, a goat lets out a bleat, maybe modern, maybe echoing through time. Who knows at this point? Back in its prime, Petra was a merchant's dream. Perfect location, flowing water, built-in drama. The Nabateans taxed caravans for passage, storage, and use of their infrastructure, and traders didn't mind. Petra was a safe stop, secure, wealthy, and rumor has it, home to the best pomegranate wine in the region. That's not a joke. A clay jar fragment was found with scribbled Nabatean letters translating loosely to the good stuff. What really kept things ticking wasn't just protection, it was logistics. Nabateans were desert navigators, camel whisperers, masters of the long game. They knew which trails had shade, which oases were safe, and how to make a caravan move like clockwork. Imagine FedEx, but in tunics and with a much higher chance of sandstorms. The fringe tidbit? Some scholars believe the Nabateans used coated pebbles to track transactions, a kind of pocket abacus. A few odd artifacts point to this. Tiny marked stones found in bundles, tucked inside what looked like portable ledgers. Could just be ancient kid toys, or the world's first accounting hack. As you explore the empty marketplace, your fingers trail the stone where countless other hands once fumbled coins, counted beads, maybe even doodled nervously while haggling. The groove patterns and faint tool marks feel almost intimate. It's easy to forget this was a living space, with children laughing, dogs barking, someone yelling about missing onions. You step over a stone threshold into a space that might have been a shop. The interior's dark and cool, natural refrigeration. The stone shelves are still intact. If you squint, you can imagine jars of honey, stacks of dyed cloth, tiny bronze figurines waiting to be picked up and bargained for. Did someone light a lamp in here every night? Did the same customer come every week asking for that one rare spice no one ever had in stock? Historians still argue whether the market areas were seasonal or permanent. Was Petra a stop-and-go caravanserai, or a city with year-round commercial neighborhoods? The archaeological evidence suggests both, but nothing definitive. What's clear, though, is that the people here weren't just surviving in the desert. They were thriving, and they were making serious coin doing it. And about that coin, Nabatean currency was elegant. The coins bore likenesses of kings and queens, often facing each other, like a royal text thread frozen in silver. These coins weren't just for show, they were symbols of political legitimacy. They told stories, sometimes literally, with inscriptions revealing reigns, marriages, or alliances. If a Roman coin said, "I own you," a Nabatean coin whispered, "We built this together." You emerge from the stall and blink against the sun, now just beginning its descent. Shadows stretch long across the ground, and the air shifts cooler. A breeze curls through the market ruins, sending a soft whistle through a half-broken arch. Up ahead, a few staircases carved into the rock lead upward. It's tempting. You take one, slowly because erosion is a trickster, and rise above the former marketplace. From this new perch, the view is a panorama of sandstone color, fading from gold to blush to burnt umber. The city stretches before you like a memory being gently exhaled. You sit, let your legs dangle, and imagine a moment. A merchant, right here, sharing dates and flatbread with a traveler from Damascus, gossiping about some royal wedding, debating whether the weather's going to destroy the Eastern Trail again. That merchant had a family, dreams, maybe a plan to move north one day. And now, dust, echoes, and your wandering imagination. As you lean against the cool rock, you notice something carved beside you. It's faint, worn by time. A flower, a symbol, a signature. Nabatean graffiti isn't rare, but it is fascinating. A surprising amount of it is ordinary. Names, prayers, declarations of love. One even translates roughly to, "The goat is not mine," which raises many questions and answers exactly none. The sun sinks lower, painting the cliffs in deep orange hues. It's that golden hour where everything feels sacred, and your footsteps seem to make less sound. You take a deep breath, and the smell of warm stone and dust fills your nose. There's something deeply grounding about it, like Petra wants you to remember this. Every sight, every smell, every imagined whisper of market chaos long past. Before you head down from your perch, you glance back at the marketplace. Empty now, quiet, but not forgotten. You know it lived once. It bustled, argued, laughed. It welcomed strangers and tricked more than a few. And even though the stalls are long gone, you can't help but feel like somehow the deals are still echoing through the stone. One more breath, one more glimpse at the sun dipping behind the cliffs. And you rise, stretch your back, and begin walking again, deeper into Petra. Toward the secrets carved not just in rock, but into the very memory of the place. Your sandals scuff over the stone as you continue along a narrow path that hugs the base of a cliff. Something subtle shifts in the scenery. The ruins around you feel less ceremonial, more clever. Like they're not trying to impress you. They're trying to outsmart the desert. You stop and stare at a smooth groove running along the wall beside you. At first, it just looks like a crack, the kind sandstone loves to show off. But then it turns, bends, dips, climbs. It's not random. It's a water channel. And now that you're looking for them, you start spotting them everywhere. Carved into the cliffs, snaking beneath walkways, connecting from one cistern to another like an ancient plumbing system. The Nabateans didn't just survive in Petra's blistering heat. They made the place flourish. While other desert civilizations prayed for rain, the Nabateans built an infrastructure that could trap, tame, and stockpile water like desert magicians with a slide rule. This was their superpower. Everywhere you look, the city hides its water secrets. Ceramic pipes, underground reservoirs, and precision-cut channels designed to steer rare flash floods exactly where they wanted. Imagine it, you're a raindrop falling into a storm basin, funneled through engineered paths into a covered cistern, stored beneath the city until a thirsty traveler fills their jug. Historians still argue whether this system was developed all at once or evolved over generations. Some believe Petra's earliest settlers simply observed how water flowed naturally, then mimicked it. Others suggest there was a master planner, a desert Da Vinci with a chiseled obsessions with rainfall. And speaking of rainfall, Petra's storms didn't play nice. The region gets long dry spells interrupted by sudden, violent deluges. You're walking in a land where water either meant salvation or catastrophe. The Nabateans respected that. They honored it, and they made the storm work for them. There's a scholarly thrill in how advanced it all is. Petra had an urban hydrological system sophisticated enough to supply a city of tens of thousands. Even Roman engineers reportedly scratched their heads when they saw it. One aqueduct section you just passed, it had built-in filters, sediment traps, overflow controls. This wasn't just catching puddles in a bucket. This was a full-blown water management empire. You step into the shade of an overhang where the air cools instantly. Below it, a massive reservoir carved directly into the rock opens like the mouth of some sleeping beast. Its sides are blackened and stained by centuries of water and minerals. You peer in. Dry now, but imagine it brimming, echoing with the plop of a dropped bucket, the splash of a traveler rinsing their hands. Nearby, a faded carving catches your eye, two parallel zigzag lines with a circle above them. No one quite agrees what it means. Water god? Flood warning? A Nabatean doodle mocking the last guy who fell in? We may never know. And here comes your quirky tidbit. The Nabateans may have used goat bladders as canteens. Lightweight, flexible, and, well, kind of gross, but practical. Picture yourself taking a long swig from one of those under the Petra sun. Vintage goat pouch hydration. You can't beat the classics. As you follow one of the channels uphill, you realize it's not always about collecting water. Sometimes it's about protecting from it. Petra's many carved staircases and narrow passes could turn deadly in a flash flood. So the Nabateans created bypass routes, overflow paths designed to guide the fury of nature away from where people lived. There's a reason the city wasn't wiped out every decade. You climb higher. The view expands. Below you, Petra sprawls like a sand-colored jigsaw puzzle. But what you notice now, more than temples or tombs, are the water systems. They're everywhere. Subtle, clever, hidden in plain sight. Like the city was always whispering, we don't just survive, we outthink. And then, suddenly, it hits you. This water mastery was their power source. Not gold, not armies, but water. The Nabateans sold it, taxed it, guarded it, and worshipped it. They built their civilization around a resource everyone else took for granted or feared. In that way, Petra wasn't just a city. It was a desert fortress of fluid control. One more bend in the trail leads you to a crumbled structure once believed to be a guard post for water access. Nothing fancy, just stone walls and the remains of a low bench. But its placement tells the story. From here, you could see the channel running to the lower cistern, and beyond that, the aqueduct. In essence, someone sat right here, centuries ago, overseeing the lifeblood of Petra, maybe sipping something cool, probably hoping for rain. As you rest beside it, the wind picks up again. It snakes through the channels, making a soft hum. Not music exactly, but close, like the system itself is still breathing, waiting. You get up, brush sandstone dust off your legs, and follow the slope down again, this time toward a fountain, or what's left of one. A large stone bowl, now dry and cracked, sits in the open, with channels leading into and away from it. This might have been a public watering spot, or even a place for ritual cleansing. Petra wasn't just about efficiency, it was about beauty, even in function. Water didn't just keep people alive here. It fed the trees, the gardens, the fountains. It was part of the experience. Imagine visiting this city and being greeted not just by towering facades, but by the sound of bubbling springs and leafy courtyards in the middle of the desert. Your modern brain still struggles to accept it. As you walk on, one final water marvel waits, an arched tunnel under a cliff, reinforced with bricks and lined with channels. The path is cool and dark, the kind of place where you whisper without meaning to. You pause inside. It's silent. Just you, the stone, and a ghost of running water. The Nabateans are long gone, but their fountains, their cisterns, their water logic, still here, still working in pieces, still outsmarting the heat. And you've just walked through their beating heart, the city's pulse, its most precious rhythm. Drink that in. You step out of the cool tunnel and blink against the returning sunlight. The air feels different here, thinner, maybe drier, or maybe it's just your imagination catching up. But something's changed. The city isn't whispering anymore. It's talking, loudly. You've passed the intro, the marketplace, the watery veins that fed it all. And now you're walking into the city's core. Up ahead, the cliffs widen and carved facades begin to stack. Not just one or two impressive carvings like the treasury, but dozens, entire cliff sides sliced and etched like vertical city blocks. This is Petra's living quarter, but don't let that term fool you. Nothing about it is modest. You're entering the street of facades, and these aren't just homes. These are statements. You walk along what was once a main thoroughfare, though now it's more rubble than road. On either side, multi-tiered tombs and dwellings rise directly from the sandstone. Some are rectangular and clean-cut, others ornate and stacked with layers like pastry. Every inch seems planned, symbolic, even if what those symbols meant is still up for debate. Historians still argue whether these dwellings were used year-round or more like summer homes for elites passing through. Were they permanent Nabatean neighborhoods or ritzy caravan condos? Archaeological digs hint at both. Some had drainage systems and sleeping platforms. Others, empty rooms that might have just looked nice for guests but weren't actually lived in. You glance up at one particularly massive facade, tall, flat, precise, and wonder who carved it. Better yet, how? You're talking about people chiseling into a sheer cliff face without cranes, pulleys, or safety gear. You think you're brave for climbing IKEA shelves without anchoring them. Imagine dangling off a rope with a hammer and divine inspiration. Here's a fun fringe idea for you. One fringe theory suggests the Nabateans might have used scaffolding suspended from ropes above, rather than building up from the ground. You basically rappel down, carving as you go. It sounds absurd, but tool marks suggest top-down work in several places. Imagine that job interview. Must be good with heights, okay with dust, comfortable using bronze tools 40 feet above ground. Benefits include sand in your ears forever. As you continue walking, you notice how the facades blend into one another. There's no consistent architectural style. One doorway is triangular and clean, the next is curved and elaborate, the next completely blank. Some are almost Greek, others feel almost Mesopotamian. Petra didn't pick a lane. It mashed everything together like a cultural buffet. That's not an accident. The Nabateans were travelers. Their kingdom was a sponge for foreign influence. They absorbed Egyptian symbols, Hellenistic columns, Persian flourishes, and Arabian motifs. Petra was a design remix before the word remix even existed. This wasn't just copying, they were curating. They turned architecture into a language you couldn't ignore. You duck into a lower-cut facade, a modest one compared to the showier neighbors. Inside, it's cool and dark, the air heavy with stillness. The walls are smooth but unadorned, no carvings, just room after room, each one more shadow than space. It feels like a quiet pause in the middle of a symphony. Someone once called this place the city built for the dead, but it was also built by the living, for the living. And they lived here well. Evidence of plaster, painted walls, even mosaic floors in some of the finer homes, all long since cracked, faded, or looted, but enough to imagine them once bursting with color. You picture a Nabatean noble lounging in the doorway, eating grilled lamb, arguing about politics or weather, or which caravan had the better incense. You pass a staircase carved directly into the wall. It leads nowhere now, just an empty platform. But back then, maybe it led to a second story, a roof garden, or even a prayer nook. Scholars think these homes might have been built vertically, each level with a different use. Storage below, sleeping mid-level, and open-air social space up top. Ancient real estate with excellent ventilation. And now a more somber thought. These facades, many of them, aren't homes at all. They're tombs. Petra's idea of final real estate. Some were royal, some were family plots. And some, we honestly don't know. They were sealed with doors, now long gone, and emptied long before archaeologists got there. Some say by tomb raiders. Others suggest the bodies were never meant to remain. There's one particularly elaborate tomb with Corinthian columns, steps leading up, and a pediment with relief carvings so worn they look melted. Some archaeologists believe it belonged to a Nabatean general. Others say it might have been a collective vault, multiple families pooling wealth to build something grand. No one agrees, of course. Welcome to ancient real estate. High value, zero paperwork. A strange little detail grabs your attention, what looks like a channel running into one of the tombs. Not out, into. Some fringe researchers suggest this might have been part of a purification ritual, where water was run into the tomb before a burial, a symbolic cleansing of the body or the space. Others say it's a simple drainage feature. You decide which one feels spookier. You continue on, and soon the facades begin to thin. The canyon tightens again briefly before opening to another plaza. From this vantage point, the entire stretch of carved dwellings is visible behind you, a stone neighborhood, frozen mid-sentence. each one telling a different story. Some loud, some humble, some still whispering, others silent. You sit down on a sun-warmed rock at the edge of the plaza and stretch your legs. The air smells of minerals and dust, with a faint hint of nearby vegetation. A low buzzing, maybe a bee, maybe a tiny drone if you squint at history creatively, hums past your ear. You close your eyes for a second, just enough to imagine yourself here centuries ago. No phone, no GPS. Just sandstone beneath your feet, a ceramic cup of spiced wine in your hand, and a sky so wide it might swallow you whole. And still, you wouldn't want to leave. Not yet. You push up from the rock and brush your hands on your legs, grit sticking like it wants to follow you home. As you walk on, the facades start to thin. The city shifts again. Less about the grandeur of stone, more about the people behind it all. And tonight, we're meeting someone you definitely haven't seen in the movies, Queen Shakilath. That's right, while Petra's pink cliffs get all the attention, behind them ruled a queen whose name was stamped on coins and who may have held more power than history usually lets ancient women have. You won't find her face carved into a cliff, but her fingerprints are all over Nabatean politics. Shakilath appears on currency next to her husband, King Aretas IV, around the 1st century CE. And not just a little side profile in the corner. No, she's facing him, same size, same prominence. That might seem like a small artistic choice, but in ancient royal propaganda, it's a megaphone. The coins are some of the strongest evidence we have that she wasn't just a queen consort, but a co-ruler. Some historians argue she may have handled domestic affairs, trade, even diplomatic relationships with Rome. Others insist the coins were just symbolic, and Aretas was the only true power. But the fact that we're still debating this 2,000 years later, that's saying something. You pause under a small, square-cut archway that once marked the entrance to an upper-level compound, probably a wealthy residence or even a palace, maybe one of Shakilath's hangouts. You imagine her walking through here, robes trailing in the dust, head high with a half smirk that says, "Yes, I'm in charge. Yes, you can keep pretending I'm not." There's something satisfying about that image. Nabatean society didn't work quite like Rome or Greece. Women had a surprisingly visible role, at least in royal circles. Shakilath's coins weren't the only ones. Other queens appear too, like Huldu and Hagiru. Sometimes with inscriptions, sometimes without, but almost always with presence. In a world where most women were legally invisible, the Nabateans handed a few of them crowns and chisel-worthy legacies. Now here's a lesser-known tidbit. There's a theory that Queen Shakilath was heavily involved in Petra's trade negotiations with nearby kingdoms and tribal leaders. According to some fringe research, inscriptions on boundary stones outside Petra reference a royal agreement forged by a female hand, possibly hers. If true, it makes her one of the Middle East's earliest female diplomats. And we all know managing trade routes in the desert wasn't exactly your average PTA meeting. You take a slow turn through a less restored path, the sandstone jagged and uneven, like a tongue of earth curling back on itself. Above you, faded carvings peek from high ledges, symbols, possibly letters, half lost to time. One looks vaguely like a falcon. Another might be a stylized sun or a pancake. Hard to tell after 2 millennia of erosion. You come across a quiet alcove, just a dip in the cliff with a view that rolls out into the hills. Someone definitely stood here once to think. Maybe Queen Shakilath herself. She might have looked out at her city, proud of the water systems, the growing trade, the temples. Maybe she was tired, maybe she was plotting, or maybe she was just enjoying the silence, one sandal off, scratching her ankle like a regular person. Royalty is still human, after all. Historians still argue whether the Nabatean queens wielded true political authority or were more symbolic figures propped up by the king's power. But the coinage, the inscriptions, and the sheer confidence with which Shakilath and her peers are presented suggest something stronger than just ceremonial roles. You don't share a coin with the king unless you're at his level or above it. You take a moment to rest on a stone bench carved low into the rock wall. The shade cools your back. A lizard darts by, unimpressed by your historical insight. You glance down at the dust by your feet and imagine gold coins buried underneath, still bearing the elegant curl of Shakilath's Nabatean name, still glinting with stories untold. In one fringe legend told by Bedouin locals, Shakilath wasn't just a queen, she was a magician, said to have whispered to the cliffs themselves, commanding stone to shape and water to flow. That may just be myth, but look around. Giant monuments in the middle of a desert, hydrology that baffles modern engineers. You get why someone might believe it. Back on the path, the terrain slopes gently, leading you through what might have once been noble gardens. Archaeological digs here have found pollen remnants from species not native to the region, imported trees and flowering shrubs, proof of luxury in a place where most people struggle just to find shade. Maybe these were planted under Shakilat's orders. Maybe she walked through here, fingering fragrant petals, holding court under a pergola, barking orders at ministers and servants with the serene energy of someone who absolutely runs the place. As you pass through a small, cracked gate, half collapsed and overgrown, you can almost hear her voice. Not words, exactly, just presence. That feeling you get when you know someone important has been here. Like the stone hasn't quite forgotten her. You continue, step by step, deeper into the city she once helped rule, deeper into the carved corridors of a kingdom that doesn't always speak, but never stops echoing. You wander through the quiet shadows, past Queen Shakila's lingering aura, and deeper into the cliffside maze. The facades are different here, not grand houses or tombs, but sacred spaces, temples, shrines, nooks carved out for beings that don't smile or weep like humans do. You've entered the spiritual zone now, the realm of the gods. But don't expect Zeus or Isis to greet you with thunderbolts and Ankes. Petra's gods are something stranger, quieter, more blocky. You round a corner and find yourself staring at a square-shaped figure cut into the rock. No eyes, no nose, no arms or legs, just a rectangular form perched like a silent witness. This, your friend, is Dushara, the chief god of the Nabateans. And he looks nothing like what you'd expect from a desert deity. No golden throne, no lion's mane, no flowing robes. Dushara was often represented as a betel, a sacred stone block, sometimes with a faint face carved into it, sometimes just a raw, polished surface. To the Nabateans, this wasn't laziness, it was reverence. Simplicity was sacred. Why try to pin down the divine when mystery was the whole point? Betels like Dushara's were scattered throughout Petra, in temples, in private homes, in public squares, each one humming with its own presence. You step closer to this one now, resting quietly in a shaded shrine carved from pink and gold stone. It has a little platform, a groove where oil may have been poured. Someone once prayed here, eyes closed, hands pressed against cool rock. Maybe not for riches or power, maybe just for rain. And Dushara wasn't alone. Nabatean religion was a blend of local traditions and adopted deities. They pulled in Egyptian, Greek, and Mesopotamian figures like spiritual souvenirs from their trade routes. You had Al-Uzza, a powerful goddess associated with Venus, war, and water. She was sometimes symbolized by a lion, or a star, or because this is Petra, another mysterious rock. Historians still argue whether the Nabateans saw their gods as literal beings or metaphors for natural forces. Was Dushara a personified sky god, or just the Nabatean way of acknowledging the unknowable vastness above? The truth probably shifts depending on which century you're looking at, or which priest you ask. You walk past a series of shallow niches cut into the canyon wall. Some are big enough to step into. Others are just ledges, like stone mailboxes for spirits. A few still bear faint carvings, palm trees, stars, stylized human forms with outstretched arms. These were sacred places, but the line between divine and domestic feels fuzzy here. The Nabateans didn't put their gods on pedestals. They put them in the wall, within reach. And that's part of the mystery. Petra didn't have one giant temple complex like Rome or Thebes. Its sacred spaces were spread out, woven into the city itself. Gods lived among people. They didn't wait on mountaintops. You might pass a shrine while walking to the market, whisper a quick prayer before a trade deal, leave an offering after dinner. Faith wasn't an appointment, it was a constant hum. You duck into a larger chamber now, possibly once a full-fledged temple. The ceiling is smoke-blackened from centuries of oil lamps. The floor is smooth, worn by countless feet. And at the far end, yes, another Betel. This one taller, framed by low stone columns. You get the sense this was a serious spot, not just a neighborhood shrine. This was where you brought your big questions. The air is cool here, quiet. You can almost hear the chants, the echo of drumming, the shuffle of sandals, maybe even a goat bleating in protest before a sacrifice. Yes, sacrifices were a thing. Animal offerings, incense, precious oils. It wasn't all metaphor and vibes. The gods wanted their share. A fringe theory? Some believe that Petra's most sacred rituals happen not in public temples, but in secret high places. Remote, cliff-top platforms accessible only to priests or royalty. Kind of like spiritual VIP lounges. We'll get to those eventually, but for now, you're still at street level, face to face with gods that are more monolith than man. One peculiar thing catches your eye. A set of grooves carved into the floor leading away from the altar. Drainage, sure, but more specifically, blood channels designed to carry offerings, liquid ones, into holding basins or out into the desert. Again, not gory, just ancient practicalities. It reminds you that Petra's beauty and spirituality weren't clean and tidy. They were raw, lived in, real. You leave the temple and follow a narrow ledge path along the cliff. A low wall on one side keeps you from falling into the rocky ravine below. Someone once built that wall. Maybe a priest, maybe a volunteer, maybe a kid tasked with the holy work of fetching water for the gods. Off to the side is a worn carving. Two lions, stylized and almost cartoonish, standing opposite each other with a central basin in between. This was likely a fountain of sorts, connected to Petra's water system but used for ritual washing or blessing. Maybe even a sacred bath. It's dry now, of course, but the imagination has no droughts. As you wander through the sacred zone, you start to realize something else. The gods of Petra weren't apart from the world. They were part of it, etched into it, quietly pulsing in the background of everyday life. They weren't up in the clouds throwing lightning bolts. They were in the stones beneath your feet, in the water that trickled down carved channels, in the silence between echoes. And somehow, that feels even more powerful. You pass one last shrine, tucked deep into a canyon bend. Inside is a small, unassuming tile with a faint symbol, 3 vertical lines beneath a half circle. No one agrees what it means. Could be celestial, could be agricultural, could be someone's ancient graffiti doodle gone viral. You step back out into the sun, blinking. Petra's gods don't demand your belief. They don't shout, they don't sparkle, but they endure. Still here, still watching. Your legs are feeling the climb now, the kind of burn that's oddly satisfying. It's the burn of progress, of earning the next view, the next secret. You follow a winding path cut directly into the rock, and your sandals skid slightly on loose grit. This stretch doesn't feel ceremonial. It feels functional, efficient, and a little sneaky. That's because you're stepping into the side of Petra most people forget. Its network of trade, transport, and some suspect, espionage. The Nabateans weren't just carvers of beauty and whisperers of gods. They were elite desert navigators, engineers, yes, but also smugglers, route keepers, masters of making sure things and people moved. Imagine it. You're part of a caravan hauling frankincense from southern Arabia. You've traveled hundreds of miles. Camels are grumpy. You're grumpy. And now, just as you enter Petra, it's like the desert parts and offers you a rest stop with stone gates, food stalls, and fresh water. But what you don't see is what's behind the cliffs, an entire system designed to monitor your goods, your business, and maybe your loyalty. The Nabateans weren't just desert hosts. They were gatekeepers, and possibly ancient information brokers. You pass another narrow side path, a shortcut maybe, or a patrol route. Petra is full of these little side trails that aren't on any tourist map. Some were for maintenance, some likely for local traffic, and some scholars believe these could have been used for secret communication between key sites. Picture messengers darting through the cliffs at night, carrying coded messages in knotted cords or etched tokens. A quirky tidbit? There's a theory floating around that Nabatean traders used perfume-scented cloths, each scent meaning something different, to signal messages across caravans without speaking. Think of it like an early olfactory Morse code. Jasmine? Safe to approach. Myrrh? Dangerous ahead. Goat sweat? Unintentional but always present. You make your way into a wider pass, flanked by partially restored archways and the remains of what might have once been watchtowers. These weren't just decorative structures, they were checkpoints. High enough to see a caravan approach, with hidden compartments underneath. For storage, for toll records, for bribes, possibly all 3. Historians still argue whether the Nabateans had an official spy network. There's no written record. Nothing obvious, anyway. But the circumstantial evidence is juicy. Petra's trade routes were tightly controlled, and foreign powers often complained about the Nabateans' ability to vanish and reappear with uncanny timing. It's not a stretch to imagine that behind the incense and architecture was a network of eyes and ears, disguised as merchants and monks. And then there's the terrain itself. The Nabateans used their environment like a chessboard. Caves with viewports, high ledges with sightlines stretching miles, and storage rooms cleverly camouflaged into the cliffs. Some archaeologists have found small guard holes near Petra's main routes, tiny windows angled just right to spy on incoming travelers without being seen. You pause at one such overlook. It doesn't seem like much at first, just a dip in the rock. But from here, you can see the entire lower canyon. It's a perfect vantage point, and if you squint, you can imagine a cloaked figure tucked into the shadows centuries ago, tracking the movement of a spice caravan below. Not interfering, just watching. Petra wasn't just about what came in. It was about who got to take it out. The Nabateans knew how to follow the trail backward, traders, travelers, even diplomats, and track their cargo. They controlled not just the roads, but the narrative around those roads. And that's a very modern kind of power. You move on, passing a row of caves low in the canyon wall. Some are shallow, others go deeper than you'd expect. These weren't always homes or tombs. Some were likely storerooms or data caches in the ancient sense. Imagine clay tablets stashed inside, or knotted ropes representing inventories, secret contracts etched in Aramaic shorthand, and every now and then something truly weird turns up. One cave, discovered in the early 1900s, contained rows of carefully stacked incense containers and one Roman dagger embedded upright in the floor. No explanation, no bodies, just a knife, standing like it was waiting for someone to return. Creepy? Yes. Symbolic? Maybe. A warning? Possibly. Or maybe just someone with dramatic flair. Speaking of Aramaic, Nabatean inscriptions are still being deciphered today. Their script was cursive, fluid, and often crammed into tight stone corners like ancient sticky notes. We've translated some, names, blessings, transactions, but others, still undeciphered. Like one particularly odd string of text carved upside down near a hidden cistern. No one agrees on the meaning. Some think it's a poem. Others think it's a prank. Maybe even the world's first passive-aggressive review. Water tasted like camel. 2 stars. You step out from the cave-riddled cliff and arrive at a plateau where the city seems to pause. The wind is stronger here, tugging gently at your clothes. You look out and see the vast emptiness beyond Petra. The dry plains, the distant hills, the old roads vanishing into haze. That's where the caravans came from, and it's where they returned, loaded with Petra's treasures and sometimes secrets. And here's the kicker. Petra wasn't built on conquest. It thrived because of control. Subtle, unseen. The Nabateans didn't need to build walls. They built relationships, reputations, and systems that made outsiders dependent on them. As you stand at the edge of the plateau, you realize you're not just walking through a city. You're walking through an ancient intelligence network disguised as hospitality. Soft hands offering dates and water, but knowing exactly who you are, what you carry, and where you're going next. Clever, isn't it? The wind still dances along the plateau behind you, but now you descend, slow and careful, into one of Petra's quieter, more enigmatic layers. You're stepping away from the trade routes and the facades into something stranger, more personal. Here the stone doesn't shout. It whispers, in looping script, in secret signs, in the curling tail of a forgotten alphabet. You're entering the world of Nabatean writing. It's everywhere, if you know where to look. Chiseled into cliff walls, scrawled beside tombs, scribbled onto pottery shards. A mix of elegance and efficiency, Nabatean script is an early form of Aramaic, closely related to what Jesus would have spoken, and a precursor to Arabic. It looks like a distant cousin to cursive, all curls and swoops, like the writer had one eye on beauty and the other on how quickly they could finish before the sun melted their ink. You pass a shallow wall with names scratched into it. Not tourists, though don't worry, there's plenty of that elsewhere. These are ancient names. Malachus, Shakla, Abdobadat. They may have been traders, stonemasons, or priests, but what they all had in common was the urge to say, I was here. One mainstream historical fact that surprises most people: the Nabateans didn't leave behind long scrolls or big official records, nothing like what the Egyptians did. Instead, what survives are personal inscriptions, dedications, notes, warnings. It's like we're reading the margins of their lives, not the full chapters. You trail your fingers across one inscription carved near the entrance of a temple. The letters are smooth, polished by time and wind. The phrase translated is simple: To Dushara, my protector, may my caravan return full. You smile. That's an energy you understand. Same hope, different century. But the truth? Deciphering Nabatean writing is still a wild ride. Scholars continue to debate the meanings of many phrases. Historians still argue whether certain inscriptions are poetry, contracts, or jokes. There's one famous carving that translates roughly to, "He was strong like a rock, but not very bright." Was that an insult, a proverb, or just ancient sass? What makes it even more complicated is the fact that the Nabateans weren't exactly into punctuation or spacing. So, one sentence can run into the next, and suddenly you're not sure if someone is praising their god or asking for a discount on sheep. You duck into a small grotto where graffiti layers the walls. Yes, ancient graffiti. Names, prayers, even tiny drawings. A camel with exaggerated knees, a spiral star, a figure with stick arms holding what could be a sword, or a very confident spatula. These weren't carved by kings. They were made by travelers, workers, maybe even bored teenagers. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some experts believe certain markings in Petra might be proto-magic symbols, charms carved for protection or to ward off bad spirits. There's one little swirl pattern that shows up in multiple tombs, always near the entrance. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe it was the ancient version of hanging a horseshoe above the door. Back in the sunlight, you spot a smooth slab with a longer inscription. It's more formal, more precise. Likely an official dedication. In the reign of Aretas, son of Obodas, the water was made to flow. That's a plaque-worthy moment. Probably stood beside a new cistern or fountain, and now it stands here, half broken, mostly ignored, but still speaking. You start to notice how often the writing is tied to water, carved near aqueducts, near cisterns, beside fountains. Water was power in Petra, and writing was how you claimed it. There's an unspoken poetry in that, ink and thirst flowing together. There's also the ongoing mystery of who was doing the carving. Were there official scribes? Were stonemasons literate? Did priests double as authors? The answers shift with every discovery. A broken bowl here, a hidden chamber there. We're still piecing together the full story. You rest for a moment beside a stone ledge where someone once etched the Nabatean alphabet, letter after letter, lined up like they were practicing. Maybe it was a teacher showing a student. Maybe it was someone trying to learn alone, copying what they saw. Either way, it feels incredibly human. You've probably written your own ABCs somewhere once, on a napkin or a notebook edge. Suddenly, you and a Nabatean kid from 2,000 years ago have something in common. And here's another fun, lesser-known point. Petra has some of the earliest known examples of writing on skin. Well, not literally skin that survived, but references to inked hands and skin scrolls exist in surrounding texts. Whether or not those ever made into Petra is up for debate, but it paints a fascinating picture of an empire that balanced the permanence of stone with the fleeting speed of ink. As the sun shifts, shadows fall across the carvings, and some become impossible to read. Others stand out in high relief. Light and time work together here, hiding and revealing different messages depending on the hour. It's like the city decides what it wants you to see and when. You pass one last carving on your way out of the writing zone. Just a name, barely visible. Rayan. No title, no date, no message, just Rayan. You whisper it to yourself. Rayan, someone once stood here, maybe watching the sky, maybe waiting for a caravan to arrive, maybe carving his name because he wanted to matter, and now you remember him. The stone remembers too. The air cools as you drift deeper along the cliffside, the light mellowing into soft honey. It's not quite evening, but Petra seems to exhale now. Shadows stretch, and the pink stone darkens like a shy blush. You're standing in front of a series of grand, gaping tombs. Not cute little cubbyholes. These are massive, monumental architectural megaphones announcing the presence of someone once deeply important and now entirely anonymous. This is Petra's Royal Tombs District. And here's the kicker. No one's really sure who's buried where, or even if anyone is buried in some of them. You walk toward one with a gabled roof, its facade as tall as a 5-story building. A broad staircase, now eroded, leads up to a yawning entrance. This is the urn tomb, named for the large urn perched on its upper ledge, because creativity in naming wasn't exactly a Nabatean strength. But what they lacked in poetic labels, they made up for in flair. Inside, a chamber large enough to host a dinner party, or a haunting, or both. Step carefully. The floor is uneven, and the ceiling echoes with the occasional squeak of a bat or two. It's silent otherwise, so silent in fact your heartbeat starts to sound dramatic. You glance around. The chamber walls are smooth, with little side niches cut in, a few feet high, a few feet deep. Could have held urns, offerings, bones, or none of the above. It's genuinely unclear. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The urn tomb was later converted into a Byzantine church. Inscriptions from the 5th century CE are still visible inside, offering prayers to a different kind of god. So this place has seen not just the rise and fall of Petra, but a shift in spiritual identity entirely. Same stone, different hymns. You step back outside and gaze across the rock face, 4 tombs in a row. The urn tomb, the silk tomb, the Corinthian tomb, and the palace tomb. Together, they form what archaeologists call the royal tombs. Why? Because they're big, beautiful, and probably expensive. But do we know who's buried in them? Not really. Historians still argue whether these tombs belong to actual kings or just elite families flexing their wealth. Some suspect they were public monuments, empty of bodies, meant to impress. Others think the real royal graves lie elsewhere, hidden, looted, or never used. Tombs here were carved with ambition, but not necessarily with permanence in mind. The silk tomb gets its name from the wild striations in the stone, bands of red, orange, gold, and lavender flowing like fabric. You step closer, and it's almost hypnotic. Natural color gradients ripple across the facade like desert auroras. Inside, though, it's sparse. Just a single chamber, walls darkened with age, no inscriptions, no decoration, a velvet box with no note inside. It's humbling, really. All this effort, all this grandeur, and the silence of mystery. You half expect a plaque, "Here lies someone," or, "We honestly don't know, but weren't they stylish?" Your quirky tidbit? In the palace tomb, an absolutely massive facade designed to mimic a multi-story building, archaeologists once found a Nabatean wine jug stuffed into a niche behind a carved panel, totally untouched for nearly 2,000 years. Inside, dust and disappointment, but still, a wine jug in a secret slot. Was it a ritual? A prank? A farewell gift for the afterlife? Or just someone hiding their best vintage from nosy in-laws? As you continue walking along the line of tombs, a few things start to repeat. Pillars, niches, roof carvings that imitate wooden beams, even though everything is stone. This was a city obsessed with illusion. They carved their rock to look like architecture built in wood and brick, columns pretending to support roofs that never needed support, staircases leading to nowhere, facades mimicking royal palaces. It wasn't just about utility, it was about appearance. And maybe that's the most human thing of all. We build tombs to feel remembered. We design facades to suggest importance. We crave stories, even if we forget the names attached to them. One of the lesser-known features you pass now is a small bench carved outside one of the tombs. It looks innocent, like a resting spot for tired feet. But some scholars believe it was for mourners. A place to sit, reflect, maybe even perform rituals, and maybe just cry. You sit there now for a moment and imagine the weight of grief wrapped in ancient clothes, the hush of mourning in a canyon that doesn't care, but listens anyway. A few tombs bear chisel marks that seem abrupt, unfinished. One facade ends halfway through its arch. Another has columns outlined but never sculpted. Did the family run out of money? Did the carver fall? Was the tomb never needed? Again, no one knows. Petra's cliff faces are a half-written book, sentences trailing off mid-carve. You step into one of the less glamorous tombs, a smaller, more eroded one nestled between giants. Inside, it's quiet. The walls still show signs of soot, perhaps from oil lamps. The floor is uneven, and in the back, a series of burial niches, small and tucked away. This one feels more personal, more likely to have been used. The air smells faintly of stone and time. You take a breath. Historians still argue whether Petra's grandest tombs were ever truly finished. Many lack the typical burial features: no sarcophagi, no mummified remains, no grave goods. Some were found looted centuries ago. Others were simply empty. Were they symbolic, ceremonial, or just robbed blind? As you emerge back into the light, you glance up at the cliff wall once more. The tombs cast long shadows. The sunlight paints them gold for a few last minutes before fading. And it hits you. These tombs, mysterious as they are, might be Petra's truest voice. Not because of what they contain, but because of what they don't. They're monuments to memory itself, to the idea that someone was once here, important, revered, grieved, and now they echo, waiting for footsteps like yours to wonder. You leave the tombs behind, your shadow long and stretching ahead of you now as the sun slides closer to the horizon. The sandstone cliffs seem softer here, less carved, more natural, but no less monumental. And as you continue your quiet hike through Petra, the mood changes again, because you're not alone anymore. You feel it before you see it, that little shift in the ground, that change in the layout. A straight road, wide, structured. Your feet move from uneven Nabatean trail to clean-cut Roman paving stones, and suddenly, it's like you've entered a different city altogether. Rome has arrived. You've just stepped into the Roman section of Petra, the part of the story where sandals meet sandals, but not everyone's thrilled about it. After all, the Nabateans didn't invite Rome over for tea. They got annexed in 106 CE when Emperor Trajan decided Petra was just too shiny not to own. So, like a kid crashing someone else's treehouse, the Romans moved in and started changing things. You're walking along what was once a bustling colonnaded street. The remains of fluted columns still stand on either side, some broken, some eerily intact. You half expect a toga-clad bureaucrat to come marching down the lane, shouting tax reforms. This was Petra's makeover moment. The Romans added their signature flair: public baths, grand gates, new temples. The architectural vibe changed. What was once fluid and organic became straight-lined and stately. It's like switching from jazz to military march. Historians still argue whether this Romanization improved Petra or diluted it. Some say the infrastructure upgrades brought prosperity. Others believe Rome's arrival marked the beginning of cultural erosion, like overwriting a complex symphony with a single horn section. You pass the remains of the great temple complex, originally Nabatean, but so thoroughly Romanized that scholars still bicker over who built what and when. Massive steps lead up to towering pillars. The floor plan is symmetrical, predictable, Roman to the core. But if you squint, you can still see the Nabatean personality in the details. Little flourishes, symbols, flourished engravings that snuck in like rebellious notes in a very formal song. And here's something quirky. Within the ruins of this temple, archaeologists found the remains of a life-size stone elephant. Yep, an elephant, in the desert, in a Roman-influenced Nabatean temple. No one can agree on why. Some say it was a tribute to Dionysus. Others think it was a symbol of royal power. My personal guess? Someone just really liked elephants. You wander off the main road and find the remains of a small Roman theater. Not the big one we'll get to later, but a more intimate space, likely used for speeches, ceremonies, or debates. You sit on a stone bench and imagine the arguments that happened here. Maybe a Roman official trying to convince a Nabatean priest to switch temples. Maybe a trader angry about new taxes. Maybe someone complaining about chariot parking again. Petra didn't lose its identity overnight. The Nabateans were pragmatic. They adapted. Adopted. You start noticing that Roman roads are flanked by Nabatean carvings. Roman columns stand beside weathered betyls. A temple altar bears both Latin and Nabatean inscriptions, as if the two cultures weren't at war, just deeply uncomfortable roommates. One stone slab you pass is covered in Latin. It's an official edict, weathered by time but still legible in places. It talks about civic duties, taxes, and something called imperial tribute, which honestly sounds exactly like something you'd skip over in the terms and conditions. But what's fascinating is what isn't here. Despite Rome's presence, Petra never became just another Roman outpost. It stayed weird, complex, local. The Romans may have brought order, but the soul of the Nabatean kingdom didn't just dissolve. It simmered under the surface. You continue walking and reach the monumental gateway, the Temenos Gate. Originally a Nabatean concept, but later rebuilt with Roman grandeur. This was the ceremonial entrance to the sacred precinct. You pause here between two towering arches, and it feels like crossing a line. Behind you, the old Petra. Ahead of you, Rome's polished version. But you know better now. The polished stones may bear Roman fingerprints, but the foundation, the rhythm, it's Nabatean, still breathing beneath it all. Here's a fringe tidbit to chew on. Some researchers believe the Nabateans never truly lost control. They simply went underground, politically, not literally. They worked within Roman systems, held influence quietly, kept trade moving, like secret managers behind a very loud stage show. You take one last look at the Roman street. It's beautiful, no question, organized, majestic, but somehow less alive. You miss the chaos of the earlier Petra, the organic flow, the strange symbols and curved alleys. Here, everything's a bit too square, too clean. It's like Rome tried to polish the city into something more familiar, and in doing so, muted some of its spark. You step off the Roman road and onto an older trail. It curves, meanders, wanders like it's following a thought, not a map. And just like that, Petra's voice returns, whispering, humming, gently pulling you back into its story. Not conquered, not erased, but adapted, waiting. You're following that older trail now, leaving behind Rome's tidy colonnades and stepping back into something wilder, quieter, and somehow deeper. The stones are less uniform here, rounded by centuries, dusted with sand, and littered with small pebbles that shift beneath your feet like they're trying to whisper. And then the ground begins to rise. The slope isn't dramatic at first, just a steady incline that wraps around the shoulder of the mountain. But with each step, the air changes. It thins, it cools. Your breath gets a little deeper, and you realize you're climbing towards something ancient, something sacred, something Petra never meant for casual visitors. You're on the way to the high place of sacrifice. Sounds intense, right? And it is. Not because you're going to witness anything horrific, but because this is where the Nabateans spoke directly to their gods, or at least where they thought they could get their attention. And as you climb, heart picking up a slow, steady beat, you start to understand why. The trail gets steeper, stone steps emerge, carved directly into the mountain, like someone wanted the path to feel like a ritual itself, and it probably was. Pilgrims, priests, maybe even royalty walked this way up, 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 leaving behind the city, the trade, the tombs. This was about the sky, the heavens, the divine. About halfway up, you pause for breath and turn around. Below you, Petra stretches out like a painting, cliffs and columns, tombs and temples, all glowing with the deepening orange light of evening. It's the kind of view that makes time feel soft around the edges. You wipe sweat from your brow and keep going. And then, finally, you arrive. The path flattens, and you find yourself standing on a wide, open platform carved from solid rock, the high place of sacrifice. It feels less like a temple and more like the roof of the world. The wind rushes past, wild and clean, and the silence, it's the kind that makes your ears ring a little, like the mountain itself is holding its breath. You step forward. There's a carved altar up here, worn by centuries but still unmistakable, a rectangular platform with channels around the edges, likely used for the draining of ritual offerings. Animal offerings, most historians agree. Goats, sheep, maybe even camels on special occasions. The Nabateans didn't do human sacrifice, so breathe easy. You probably would survive this after all. Still, there's a weight to this place, the kind that makes you speak softer, walk slower. This wasn't just a ceremonial spot. It was sacred ground, a link between the sky and the stone, between the people and their gods. The altar is flanked by two obelisks carved straight from the mountain. No fancy decoration, just towering stone markers, sharp against the blue sky. Historians still argue whether this place was strictly for religious purposes or if it doubled as a political power center. After all, what better way to assert authority than to stand on the highest rock, offering blessings or demands from above? You circle the platform, letting your fingers trail along the cool surface. In some places, the original carving marks are still visible. Tools biting into stone. Human effort turned eternal. You find a small basin carved into the rock, likely used for libations or washing before rituals. It's dry now, but you imagine priests dipping their hands in water, smearing it on their faces, preparing to speak to gods that never replied with words, only weather. And here's a quirky fact. One ancient theory suggests that the Nabateans chose this high point because of its acoustics. Some believe chants sung here would echo down the valley, bouncing off cliffs, creating a voice that seemed to come from the mountain itself. Imagine that, divine surround sound in a pre-electric age. You sit for a moment at the edge of the platform, legs dangling over a dizzying drop. The wind tugs at your sleeves. Below, Petra flickers in the last light of day. The city glows rose gold and then slowly shifts to lavender. Shadows spill from the tombs. The canyons soften into silhouettes, and the temperature drops just enough to make you pull your arms close. This place wasn't designed to impress outsiders. It wasn't made for selfies or pilgrim tourism. It was carved for connection. And standing here, high above the city, the only sound being the wind and the faint rustle of dry leaves, you feel what they must have felt. That longing to speak to something bigger, that hope that a voice carried on the wind might reach a listening sky. One fringe idea? Some scholars speculate that the high place of sacrifice was also used for astronomical observations. The positioning of the obelisks, the altar, and the line of sight down the valley may have been aligned with solstices or equinoxes. Nabateans weren't just stonemasons, they were stargazers. They read the skies the way we read calendars. The sun kisses the horizon now. The cliffs begin to blush deeply, then darken. Petra is disappearing beneath shadow, slowly folding itself into night. You remain seated, letting the last warmth seep into your bones. And in this moment, time dissolves. You are one of them. You're a traveler, a pilgrim, a curious soul staring into the sunset, listening for a God who doesn't need to answer. Because sometimes just looking up is enough. The wind sighs again, a soft, hollow sound, and then stillness. You stand. The descent is ahead, narrow, winding, beautiful in its own quiet way. But you take one last glance at the altar, the platform, the sky, and then you begin the walk back down, one slow step at a time. You descend slowly from the high place, your legs a little shaky, not from fear, just from altitude and the echo of something ancient humming in your chest. The wind softens as you move lower, and with it, the city begins to return, not as noise, but as rhythm. The Nabateans built Petra into the folds of mountains, but they didn't just sculpt rock, they sculpted function. And now you're walking toward one of their most impressive feats, a system that could make the desert sing with water. This section of the city isn't flashy. There are no towering facades or grand columns. What you see are channels, tiny ledges cut into the stone, sloping ever so gently downhill. A groove here, a notch there. You'd almost miss them if you didn't know what to look for. But now you do. These were the veins of Petra, its secret music. This was a city that learned not just to collect water, but to move it with grace. From mountaintop to basin, from storm to sanctuary. No chaotic floods, no wastelands of thirst, just quiet, calculated flow. You bend down beside a narrow aqueduct and follow its path with your fingers. The angle is precise, less than 1 degree of slope. Any more and the water rushes too fast and floods, any less and it stagnates. The Nabateans got it just right. And here's the kicker. This wasn't a one-channel system. You're looking at layers, overflow routes, storm drains, filtration channels. The entire city was webbed with hydraulic thinking, so advanced it gives modern engineers a mild headache. They channeled flash floods from nearby valleys through stone gutters, catching the water in basins that funneled it into covered reservoirs. Then from those, they let it trickle to fountains, homes, and yes, even public baths. Historians still argue whether Petra's water system was the product of a central engineering plan or the accumulation of generations of trial and error. Was there a desert genius with a master blueprint? Or did each new ruler just tweak and expand the system like building onto an elaborate sandcastle? You pass a carved basin, half full of wind-blown leaves and a little rainwater from a rare storm days ago. It's cut into the ground like a stone flower, perfectly symmetrical. There's even a small ledge where someone once placed jars to collect water. The groove for overflow? Still there. Still smart. A quirky tidbit for you. The Nabateans sometimes added musical elements to their water systems. Not literal instruments, but acoustic features. One small side channel discovered near a ceremonial area has a pattern of holes that would have caused dripping water to echo like soft percussion. Was it intentional, a sonic offering to the gods, or just a happy accident? Either way, it means Petra didn't just manage water, it may have played it. And you're starting to hear it now, aren't you? The imagined trickle, the soft splash of water slipping through channels, a gentle gurgle where runoff might have joined a basin. The whole system like a desert lullaby, engineered to soothe, to serve, to survive. You step beneath a natural rock bridge, and on the far side is one of the larger reservoirs. An open-air basin, now dry but still lined with plaster that's held up for over 2,000 years. Think about that. Plaster, lasting centuries, while your bathroom grout can't make it through one summer. The wind stirs dust from the basin floor. You imagine it full, echoing with the shouts of children, the clink of buckets, the groans of camels finally allowed to drink. Water wasn't just resource here. It was ritual. It was wealth. It was life. One basin led to another and another. You follow the line of them now like a breadcrumb trail of ingenuity. Some are covered, their roofs half collapsed. Others are open to the sky, scarred by time but still intact. You pass a small spout, stone carved into a narrowing cone used to control water flow. It looks almost modern, precise, functional, beautiful in that wow, this still works kind of way. There's even a carved filter pit ahead, a shallow depression filled with gravel and sand. Rainwater would collect here first, letting the silt settle before the clean stuff flowed onward. You think back to that joke earlier about camel-flavored water. Yeah, not here. Petra drank clean. And then there's the vertical shafts, stone wells, some over 20 meters deep. These collected groundwater and rain, kept cool by being tucked into the rock. You peer into one now. It's dry, echoing, but you can feel how it could still work. Just add rain, or time. You pause beneath a small ledge, just wide enough to give shade. Above it, a gutter carved into the cliff, pointing into a shallow pool that's been dry for centuries. But if a storm hit right now, water would spill through it. The thought makes you strangely hopeful. Here's another detail. In some places, you'll find tiny holes carved in rows along the side of channels. These may have been used to anchor wooden covers, lids to protect the water from dust, heat, and animal waste. Ancient Tupperware, if you will. And here's a lesser-known fringe idea. Some believe the Nabateans considered water itself a form of deity. Not personified like Dushara or Al-Uzza, but sacred all the same. There's no hard proof of water worship, but the reverence in how it was handled speaks volumes. Every drop was guided, blessed, protected. Not a resource, a guest, a miracle. As you walk further down the slope, the sound of imagined water starts to mix with something real. A breeze, a distant ripple, maybe wind across a pool, maybe a leaking pipe somewhere, reminding you that water always finds a way. You arrive at a wide plaza where the city once gathered. Not for war, not for worship, but for water. A public fountain once stood here, flanked by lion-headed spouts, now eroded to soft blurs. You sit on the edge where the basin would have been. The stone is warm and the silence is deep. The desert should have swallowed this place. It tried. But Petra had water, and with it, wisdom. The city still sings when it rains. You may not hear it now, but trust me, it remembers. You rise from the old plaza, brushing red dust from your palms, and find your feet wandering again, not toward any grand monument, but along a narrow, crumbling path that clings to the side of the cliff like it's reconsidering its life choices. This is Petra's quieter side, the part the crowds don't usually see. Not because it's hidden, but because it's everywhere. Welcome to the tangled puzzle of Petra's paths, stairs, and shortcuts. At first glance, they seem random, tiny carved steps leading to nowhere, sloping alleys too narrow for a horse, switchbacks that spiral in absurd, slightly dizzying directions. But look again. There's intention here. These paths were designed not just for movement, but for meaning. You follow a twisting trail that doubles back on itself like a sleepy snake. It's cut into the rock, worn smooth by thousands of years of foot traffic. Traders, priests, kids chasing goats, mourners headed toward tombs, lovers sneaking off for secret rendezvous. Everyone used these paths, and each step was etched into stone like a footprint that never fades. One turn leads to a staircase. It's steep, irregular. You climb slowly, one uneven rise at a time, your legs doing that thing where they pretend they're fine until they absolutely aren't. The view gets better with each step, a little higher, a little broader. The valley below unfolds like a story you didn't know you'd been reading this whole time. Historians still argue whether these stairs were built for ritual processions or everyday travel. Some lead to sacred sites, like the high place of sacrifice you visited earlier, while others veer off toward what look like private homes, workshops, or in some cases literally into the rock itself, disappearing into hidden chambers. Were these religious routes, practical ones, or both? Depends on who you ask and how recently they've had coffee. A quirky little fact: one stairway near the southern cliffs is nicknamed the Donkey Ladder by locals, not because it's shaped like one, but because donkeys used to climb it. Yes, climb it. Those famously stubborn, flat-hooved desert taxis marched up these narrow switchbacks like it was just another Tuesday. Makes your wheezing a little less dignified, doesn't it? You pause near a bend where the path forks. One trail dives into a dark crevice, the other winds gently upward, flanked by low stone ledges. You choose up. Why? Because Petra rewards the curious and mildly reckless. Also, because it looks like there's a view. Halfway up, you spot an unusual feature: handholds. Not deep carvings, just shallow notches. These were for support, part climbing aid, part guide. And they tell you something vital: these stairs weren't just for foot traffic. People carried loads up here. Supplies, offerings, water jugs, maybe even furniture, or grandmothers. You reach the top of this ledge and emerge into what feels like a hidden courtyard. It's open to the sky, enclosed on three sides by smooth rock walls. You can still see post holes in the ground, likely for wooden beams that once supported a shaded awning or small roof. There's a little bench carved from stone, a water basin, a view that knocks the dust out of your lungs. This wasn't a temple. It wasn't a tomb. This was a rest stop, a meeting point, a place to pause and breathe, far above the chaos below. Petra wasn't just about grandeur. It was about human scale, thoughtful, functional beauty woven into every level. From here, you can trace other paths zigzagging across the cliffs like veins. Some of them are clear, main routes. Others feel almost accidental, as if the city itself got distracted mid-sentence and wandered off to finish a different thought. You spot a particularly strange trail that loops back under itself and ends at a doorway halfway up a sheer wall. There's no ladder, no sign of a second path, just a door. Scholars are baffled by a few of these. Were they ceremonial? Secret storage? The ancient version of employee entrance only? No one really knows. Petra keeps her secrets under sandstone and silence. And here's your fringe theory. A few archaeologists believe some of Petra's more confusing paths were designed for processions involving sound. That's right, ritual movement guided not by signage but by drums or chants echoing through the rock. Certain routes curve in ways that carry sound from specific angles. Were they acoustically engineered spiritual journeys? Maybe. Or maybe someone just really liked a good echo. You take a different trail back down, narrower, trickier, definitely not donkey approved. As you descend, you spot more of those little details that turn stone into story. Foot grooves, worn deep in the steps, a shallow bowl cut into the rock, maybe to hold water or coins. A cluster of graffiti, 3 stick figures, one of them with what looks like a hat. You stop and grin. That's probably the first family portrait in Petra history. You pass a shallow alcove where incense might have once burned. The black soot is long gone, but the scent, well, maybe it's just your imagination, but there's something sweet in the air. Frankincense? Or maybe your last granola bar, hard to say. The paths level out and lead back toward the central city. You emerge onto a broader street, dusty and sunlit, the scent of warm stone rising around you. And suddenly you're surrounded by ghosts, not scary ones, but ones made of footsteps. You've walked the city's veins, climbed its stairs, turned down its forgotten alleys. And now you know, Petra wasn't built in a straight line. It was built like a thought, a memory, a feeling, twisting, turning, tangled, but always going somewhere. You've wandered back into the pulse of Petra now. The late afternoon light painting everything in shades of bronze and dusty rose. Your legs ache a little. Yes, even your ankles are complaining, but something on the horizon pulls you forward. A silhouette against the cliffs, wide and regal, rising above the surrounding stone like it's waiting for applause. It's huge. You know what this is. Everyone does. The monastery, or as it's called locally, Adair. But here's the twist. It's probably not a monastery at all. That's just what 19th century European explorers decided to call it because, well, there were crosses carved inside. That's it. No monks, no soup kitchens, just really dramatic architecture. To get there, you take the long way, the only way. 800 steps, carved into the side of a mountain, winding and narrow, switchbacking through canyons and past goat-chewed shrubs. Sound relaxing? It's not. But it is glorious. The trail begins with loose gravel and goat droppings. Classic Petra. A few tired donkeys plod past you, eyeing you with that specific donkey judgment that says, "Rookie move, walking this yourself." You keep going anyway. As you climb, you pass small caves carved into the cliffs. Some are simple, likely once shelters or storage spots. Others are just there, mysterious, half-finished. Maybe meditation nooks, maybe half-hearted tombs, or maybe some Nabatean kid's hideout that's now part of history. You reach a ledge with a wide view, and the city below stretches into silence. The sun is dropping, the wind has cooled. You wipe your forehead and keep going, because now you can feel it. The monastery is just around the next bend. You turn one last corner, and there it is, massive, utterly unnecessary in scale, and completely worth it. The monastery looms over you, 50 meters wide, nearly as tall as a 10-story building, carved directly into the sandstone cliff. And unlike the treasury, which wows you with delicate detail, this one goes for power. Bold columns, simple shapes, brutal elegance. You don't look at it. You look up to it. You stand in the courtyard before it, suddenly small. The silence here is different, heavier, reverent. Maybe it's the effort it took to get here. Maybe it's the way the structure absorbs sound. Or maybe it's just awe. Historians still argue whether Adair was a tomb, a temple, or something in between. There's a platform inside that might have been an altar. There's space for a crowd, maybe for rituals. Some say it was used for ceremonies honoring the deified Nabatean kings, especially Obodas I, who was worshipped after his death. Others think it may have hosted public events, rituals that needed space and spectacle. You step into the cool shadow of the entrance. Inside, the chamber is tall and dark and surprisingly plain. No elaborate carvings, no golden altars, just a single niche carved high into the back wall, possibly for a statue, now long vanished. It's humbling. You climb 800 steps to find simplicity. But that's Petra, isn't it? It dazzles you with facades and then reminds you gently that power doesn't need clutter. Sometimes stone is the message. A quirky detail? There's a cross carved inside, centuries after the monastery's Nabatean origins. During the Byzantine era, Christian monks apparently repurposed the chamber as a church, hence the name. Whether they sang hymns in there or just stored extra robes, we're not entirely sure. But the stone held it all, unchanged. You step back outside and take a seat on one of the flat rocks in the plaza. A local cat stretches nearby and flops onto its side like it owns the place. Honestly, it probably does. The sky begins to deepen, moving from pale gold to deep lavender. The cliff faces around you absorb the colors, shifting like oil on water. The monastery, now fully bathed in shadow, feels even bigger, like it might start breathing. And here's a fringe idea for you. Some researchers believe the monastery's location wasn't chosen for religious reasons at all, but for astronomical ones. From this height and angle, certain celestial events, like the solstice sun setting directly between the cliffs, line up with the monument. Was it a solar calendar, a cosmic stage, or a beautiful accident? Petra doesn't tell. She just smiles that sandstone smile and lets you wonder. As you sit there, cooling off from the climb, you begin to hear distant sounds. The rustle of wind, a low call from a bird, and maybe, just maybe, the echo of footsteps from someone else who made this climb 1,000 years ago. Because this place holds echoes. It's too tall, too open, too aware not to. You lie back on the stone for a moment, hands behind your head. Above, the sky grows darker, one star at a time. The monastery watches you, doesn't blink. You could stay here forever, couldn't you? But eventually, you'll have to go back down. Don't worry, the path is gentler in the dark, or maybe your feet are just too tired to argue. You stand. Take one last look. The monastery doesn't say goodbye. It doesn't need to. It's always here, just waiting. The descent from the monastery is quieter than you expect. Your feet remember the steps like old friends now, awkward, uneven, but familiar. You move slowly, not just because the stairs demand it, but because the light is slipping. Petra at dusk doesn't shout, it whispers. By the time you reach the main trail again, the sky is melting into a deep indigo. The cliffs are fading to shadow, and then you see it. Just a flicker at first. A flame. Then another. And another. You follow the trail as lanterns begin to appear, set gently along the path, each one casting a soft circle of golden light onto the ground. This is Petra by night, and it's nothing like the daytime city. The sun may reveal the grandeur, but firelight reveals the soul. The wind shifts slightly, and you catch the faintest scent of wax, dust, and cardamom. Someone's brewing tea. You keep walking, guided now by the hush of flickering light. There's no rush. Petra doesn't rush, especially not after sunset. You reach the sick again, the same narrow gorge you entered through hours ago. But now, it's transformed. The lanterns line the walls like constellations fallen to earth. Each curve of the canyon glows amber and bronze, the sandstone flickering as if it's breathing. You walk slower than ever, because why would you want this to end? Somewhere up ahead, a single flute begins to play. The notes drift through the canyon, curling around your ears like silk. It's a simple melody, ancient and clear, echoing just enough to feel like it's coming from the stone itself. It's hard not to imagine Nabateans walking the same path by starlight, carrying baskets, guiding animals, whispering prayers. You arrive back at the treasury, and now it glows. Hundreds of candles are spread across the open courtyard before it, lighting the facade in the warmest, most unreal way. It doesn't look carved now. It looks conjured, like it might float up and vanish into the stars if you stop looking at it. You sit on a rug laid out for guests, shoes off, legs crossed, surrounded by strangers who suddenly feel like family. You're all part of the same secret now, the version of Petra the sun doesn't see. A storyteller steps forward. His voice is soft, melodic, and barely louder than the night air. He begins to speak in Arabic with an English interpreter by his side. Not a tour guide, a poet. He tells the legend of the jinn who guarded Petra's gates, of the hidden treasure buried beneath the treasury urn, which, of course, no one ever found, and of a lost Nabatean princess who carved her lover's name into the cliffs above the city so she'd never forget him, even if time forgot everything else. It's hard to tell where the legend ends and the real story begins. That's part of the magic. Petra lives in that space between history and myth. You sip hot tea from a small cup passed to you by a smiling host. It's sweet, spiced, warming, like someone bottled comfort and added cinnamon. A quirky tidbit you might not expect: local Bedouin storytellers sometimes include totally modern jokes in their ancient tales. You might hear about a clever goat who opens a water cistern and then trades it for Wi-Fi. The blend of ancient and now is seamless here. It's what makes Petra feel alive, even in silence. Historians still argue whether Petra by night resembles anything close to an actual Nabatean tradition. Did the city once hold lantern festivals? Were there processions after sunset? Maybe, maybe not. But the canyon, the flames, the music, it all feels right, as if time itself is taking a deep, sleepy breath. You lie back on the rug, eyes turned upward. Above you, stars begin to appear, one by one. The same stars the Nabateans would have known. The same constellations they carved symbols for. The air is crisp, cool, clean. The kind that clears your head and your heart at the same time. And then silence. No more music. No more story. Just the sound of Petra's breath, the wind nudging a candle here, rustling your jacket there. You sit up slowly. People begin to leave, walking back down the lantern path, but you stay a few minutes longer. Just you and the treasury, glowing softly in the dark. You walk forward, toes brushing candlelight. You place your hand on the stone. It's warm somehow. Or maybe you are. You whisper thank you, because something about this place deserves gratitude. Not just for what it was, but for what it still is. One last look, and then you turn to go. The sikh is darker now, most candles blown out by careful hands. But your steps feel surer. The cliffs don't close in anymore. They welcome you back the way a house welcomes its owner, quietly, patiently, with a familiarity that hums in your bones. You leave the city behind for now. But Petra, she follows you. In every flicker of light, every windswept dream, every canyon-shaped memory you carry home. The sky above Petra is black velvet now, pricked with stars that twinkle like they've been watching the city longer than any archaeologist. You've left the treasury behind, but you're not quite done. There's one more chapter the cliffs want to tell you, the part where the city goes quiet. Not just for the night, but for good. Petra wasn't always a ghost town. In fact, it held on for centuries longer than you might guess. Even after Roman annexation, even after trade routes shifted and rulers changed, people still lived here. Water still flowed, tombs were still swept, but eventually something changed. Or maybe a few somethings. You walk now through the remnants of Petra's slow unraveling. The streets feel wider, emptier. The wind blows through without stopping. And as you glance around at toppled columns and weather-worn steps, the question forms quietly: what happened? Historians still argue whether Petra's decline was natural, political, or apocalyptic. The truth, as always, seems to be a mix. Start with the obvious: earthquakes. Petra sits in a seismically active zone and it didn't escape unscathed. One massive quake around 363 CE, confirmed by both texts and rubble, damaged many of its key structures. Temples cracked, water systems broke, and while repairs were made, it's clear the city never fully recovered. But earthquakes alone can't explain it. Trade changed too. Routes that once ran straight through Petra began to bypass it. New Roman roads, new ports. Sea trade started stealing the thunder of land caravans. It's hard to stay a commerce capital when the camels stop coming. Then there's the climate. Yep, even ancient cities weren't immune to a little bad weather. Some researchers believe that regional shifts in rainfall patterns made Petra's carefully balanced water system harder to maintain. Less rain meant fewer reserves. Fewer reserves meant a harder life. A quirky, often overlooked theory: Bedouin oral tradition speaks of a slow abandonment, where Petra was not destroyed, but outgrown. They say people didn't flee all at once. They just stopped returning, moved to greener valleys, built quieter homes, took their gods and goats elsewhere. As you pass the royal tombs again, this time in near darkness, they don't feel like monuments anymore. They feel like farewells. Sand has piled up near the entrances. Footpaths have eroded, and yet there's still dignity in the way they stand, as if even in silence they remember being loved. Some parts of the city were reused. During the Byzantine era, churches were built. Inscriptions in Greek appear, layered awkwardly over Nabatean symbols. The bones of old temples were repurposed for new prayers. Petra was never erased. It was recycled, softly, slowly. You climb a small hill now, toward the remains of what may have been one of the city's last inhabited neighborhoods. Archaeological digs have revealed simple homes, no grandeur, no carvings, just stone walls, flat floors, and broken pots. You step into one, no roof overhead, and imagine the final citizens of Petra. They weren't kings or priests. They were probably farmers, shepherds, people who boiled water, scolded children, and swept sand out of doorways every morning. Their world had already changed. The great facades were ancient even to them. Maybe they used the tombs as shelter. Maybe they prayed under the same stars you see now, asking different gods the same tired questions. And then, one by one, they left. By the time Islamic rule swept across the region, Petra was already fading from the map. Not completely forgotten, just hidden. Locals knew it was there. Travelers heard whispers. But to the outside world, it was a city swallowed by the earth, waiting under layers of myth and dust. Here's a fun fact. By the 12th century, a few Crusader outposts had popped up near Petra, and one small fortress still stands on a nearby ridge. Whether the Crusaders knew what Petra really was? Debatable. They probably just liked the view. But Petra herself had gone quiet. You sit now on the edge of that crumbled neighborhood. The moonlight brushes the cliffs with silver. A lizard skitters past. Somewhere in the distance a dog barks, modern likely. A reminder that people do still live near here, just not in here. The desert reclaims what it can. Sand creeps into every crack. Wind smooths the sharp edges. And yet the stone holds. Petra endures, not as a city, but as a memory made solid. One final fringe theory to chew on. Some believe Petra's fall was not just physical or political, but symbolic. That when its gods stopped answering and its water stopped flowing, the people knew the city's time was done. They didn't need a catastrophe, just a silence too deep to ignore. You stand and brush dust from your hands again. The silence is different now, less eerie, more like a lullaby. Petra didn't vanish, she just went to sleep, and she's dreaming still. Word count. You follow a trail now that doesn't feel like a path so much as a suggestion. The ground is uneven, scattered with stones, and the cliffs seem to lean in close, as if whispering secrets they hope you're not quite ready to hear. Because tonight, Petra is getting messy. This isn't the part of the story that gets the postcards. It's the part buried under layers of dirt and denial. Petra, after all, wasn't just abandoned. It was lost. And like anything lost, it attracted attention. Some of it gentle, some of it not so much. As the centuries passed and Petra faded from mainstream memory, the city didn't vanish entirely. Locals, especially the dual Bedouin tribes, knew it well. They used its caves for shelter, its cisterns for water, and its tombs for homes. To them it wasn't lost, it was theirs, a living part of their world. But to outsiders, Petra was just a legend, a ghost city made of rose-red cliffs and buried treasure. And that's when the digging began. You crouch now beside one of the many half-collapsed tombs that dot the less visited corners of Petra. This one's been looted, obviously. The facade is defaced, the doorway widened unnaturally, the inner chamber scarred by tools. You peek inside, careful of loose stone, and see the remnants of someone's bad idea. Pick marks in the walls, bits of broken pottery, and oddly, a pair of rusted tin buttons from the 1800s. Because once word spread in the 19th century that Petra might be real, the treasure hunters arrived. They came with shovels, chisels, and a particular kind of curiosity. The kind that asks, "What can I take?" rather than, "What can I learn?" European explorers poked and prodded, hoping for golden statues, sacred scrolls, or lost jewels. What they mostly found was dust, broken jars, and the very inconvenient truth that the Nabateans didn't really go in for opulent burial goods. A quirky fact, in one particularly dramatic expedition, an early adventurer claimed he was nearly killed by local Bedouins while trying to loot a tomb. Historians suspect what actually happened was that he broke into someone's current shelter and got yelled at, which, honestly, seems fair. You follow the path into a shallower canyon now, one of the city's quieter corners. The walls here are more eroded. The carvings, if there were any, are nearly gone. But beneath your feet, there are traces of excavation, square pits, rock piles, and a few areas marked by stakes and old rope. This is where archaeologists stepped in. Not the treasure hunters, the real ones, the slow ones, the ones who brush dust with tiny bristles and log every pebble like it's a diary entry. Beginning in the mid-20th century, teams from all over the world came to Petra, not to steal, but to study. They mapped, they measured, they cataloged the chaos left behind by centuries of looters, earthquakes, and weather. And slowly, gently, Petra began to reveal herself again. Historians still argue whether the early excavations helped or hurt. On one hand, they preserved structures, reconstructed stairways, and documented artifacts. On the other, a lot of digging was done without modern standards. Some tombs were entered, cleared, and sealed again without full notes. Bones were moved, offerings were mislabeled, some records lost in wars, or floods, or office fires. Because, of course. And what about the locals? That's where things get complicated. The dual Bedouins had lived in Petra's tombs and caves for generations. It wasn't a novelty, it was home. But by the late 20th century, the rise of tourism changed everything. Jordan's government, hoping to preserve the site and make it more accessible, began relocating the Bedou to a nearby village. The tombs were cleared. Families were moved. Petra became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1985, and with that came rules. Borders, entry fees. A fringe theory, whispered more than published, suggests that some of the Bedouins still know of secret chambers, hidden tombs, or underground routes that have never been mapped. Whether it's true or just romantic legend, it speaks to the tension that still exists between heritage and history, between memory and management. You wander now through one of the old dig sites, fenced off, empty. The sign is sun-faded and missing half its text. The trench is filled in. Time, as always, keeps moving forward. But you notice something strange nearby, a small pile of stones arranged in a circle. Fresh, not ancient. Someone's been here. Maybe a kid, maybe a shepherd, maybe a modern archaeologist who still believes that Petra's deepest stories haven't been uncovered yet. Because here's the thing. Even today, Petra isn't fully excavated. Some experts say only 15% of the city has been explored. The rest, still buried under sand and silence. You sit on a rock and imagine what's beneath your feet. A forgotten plaza, a sealed temple, a carving that changes everything, or maybe just more dust. That's the gamble of archaeology. You dig through centuries hoping for a whisper, and sometimes you find one. The wind picks up again. The stars are brighter now, clearer. You hear the soft clatter of something, A small pebble dislodged, bouncing down a slope. The city stirs just a little. You stand. The looters came and went. The archaeologists dug and documented. The tourists wandered and snapped photos. And through it all, Petra remained. Patient. Quiet. Watching. She's not a city you conquer. She's a city you earn. After the stars glitter overhead like they're trying to compete with the candlelit memory of Petra by night. But they can't quite win. The cliffs still hold that golden hush from earlier, and you're making your way toward a place that isn't on many maps. Not because it's secret, because it was once simply someone's home. You're walking into a world carved not for kings or gods, but for the living, for families, for bedtime stories and goat herding and cooking fires. This is where the Bedouin once made their lives, inside Petra. That's right. Long after the Nabateans vanished into legend, and long before the tour buses started rolling in, the Dul people were living in these tombs. Not studying them, not photographing them, living in them. It's a fact that tends to shock visitors. You mean people lived in the tombs? Yes, because when you strip away the grandeur and legend, Petra was and still is a place of shelter. The stone doesn't care what you call it. Tomb, temple, pantry. If it keeps you warm at night, it's home. You duck into one of these tomb homes now, a modest chamber with a smoothed-down threshold and the faint black soot stains of old cooking fires. Inside, it's surprisingly cozy. A recessed shelf cut into the back wall once held lamps or tools. You can still see where mats were laid on the ground. The corners are rounded smooth from decades of people brushing past, coming and going. No skeletons here, no mummies, no gold, just the warm, echoing silence of everyday life. The Dul moved in centuries ago. They herded goats. They gathered water from the cisterns. They raised children in tombs once meant to honor the dead. And in doing so, they gave Petra something rare, continuity. The city didn't die. It simply changed owners. You step back out into the cool night air and spot another small cave home nearby. This one with a low stone wall built in front of it. A sort of windbreak. Or maybe a goat barricade. Some homes even had makeshift doors added, built from scrap wood and metal. Others had rugs hanging in the doorways, heavy enough to keep out sand and nosy archaeologists. A quirky tidbit? In the early 20th century, one British visitor reported being invited into a tomb by a Dole family who served him fresh goat cheese, mint tea, and stories about the spirit voices that lived in the cliffs. He said the food was excellent. The spirits, less so. The Dul had a deep relationship with Petra, not just physical, but spiritual. Many believed the cliffs were alive, that the tombs whispered, that the city listened, and maybe they were right. You pause now near a larger cave, once converted into a family compound. Some of the stone has been patched with modern cement, a mix of ancient and new. You imagine the rhythm of life here, water fetched from the spring, bread baked on hot stones, children climbing over the very structures UNESCO would later fence off. But that life changed in the 1980s when Petra was designated a World Heritage Site. The Jordanian government, under pressure to preserve Petra's monuments, began relocating the Bedouin from the tombs. A new village, Seyhoun, was built nearby. Concrete houses, roads, schools. Some families embraced the change. Others resisted. After all, their homes weren't just shelters. They were history too. Their history. Historians still argue whether the relocation was entirely fair. On one hand, it protected Petra's most fragile structures from damage. On the other, it displaced people who'd lived here for generations, turning them into visitors in their own backyard. And here's the strange, slightly poetic twist. Many Dul became guides. They now lead tours, share stories, sell crafts, run donkey rides. Some families know Petra better than any textbook ever could. Where archaeologists see data points, the Bedouin see memories. Where visitors see ruins, they see rooms. Kitchens, courtyards, that tree. Someone's grandfather tied his goat to it every afternoon. You walk a little further, and you see a flicker of light in the distance, a modern home tucked near the cliff base. A pickup truck parked beside it, satellite dish on the roof. The new Petra is layered right over the old one, like a quilt of memory and change. The Bedouin didn't disappear. They adapted. One man, now in his 70s, famously told a journalist, "I was born in a tomb. I got married in a tomb. Now I have a street address in a mailbox, but the tomb still knows my name." You kind of hope that's true. You sit down on a low wall once used to pen goats. The stars are thick now, thicker than before, and for the first time tonight you hear a new sound, music, faint, coming from a nearby home. A traditional Bedouin song played on a rabab, a one-stringed instrument that sounds like longing and dust. A fringe theory? Some anthropologists suggest the oral traditions of the duel may preserve fragments of ancient Nabatean culture. Songs, stories, even turns of phrase that drifted down through centuries like sand carried on wind. It's hard to prove, but when you hear that rebab cry, you wonder. Petra belongs to history, sure, but it also belongs to people, not just the ones who carved it, but the ones who stayed, and those who stayed left footprints you'll never see on maps, only in the dust, only in the echoes. You lie back, your head against the warm stone, and somewhere not far from where you rest, a child is falling asleep in a cave, dreaming of cliffs and stars and home. So deep that even the wind seems to whisper more softly like it's tiptoeing through Petra. But you're still awake, still walking. The cliffs loom like frozen waves, and somewhere up ahead history is waiting in disguise. Because tonight, you're about to meet the man who rediscovered Petra, a Swiss explorer, a desert imposter, a holy man with a really convincing fake identity. His name? Johann Ludwig Burckhardt. In the early 1800s, Petra wasn't lost to the locals, but to the West, it was a rumor, a legend in travel journals, barely believed. No photos, no sketches, just whispers of a city carved in stone, hidden deep in the Jordanian mountains. Enter Burckhardt, young, curious, and determined to find it. But here's the thing. He couldn't just roll up in a frock coat and top hat, waving a compass and shouting, "Good heavens, is that a Nabatean tomb?" No, that would have gotten him kicked out or worse. So he did something bold. He went undercover. He trained in Arabic, studied Islamic law, grew a beard, adopted the name Sheikh Ibrahim ibn Abdallah. And then, in 1812, he slipped through the mountains dressed like a wandering holy man on pilgrimage. You're walking his path now, retracing the final steps he took before he saw Petra with his own eyes. He arrived at the outer cliffs with a clever excuse. He told his Bedouin guide that he wanted to sacrifice a goat at the tomb of Aaron, the brother of Moses, believed by some to be buried nearby. That part was true. The goat didn't make it. But the tomb? Just a diversion. His real destination was this canyon. The sick. You enter it again now, not with torches or drums, but with quiet awe. Imagine Burckhardt stepping through here with wide eyes, heart pounding, not daring to look too curious, pretending not to care that a city was emerging from the rock before him. And then, boom, he sees the treasury. He doesn't gasp, he doesn't kneel, he doesn't sketch or measure, he just nods, cool as a cucumber, pretending to admire it casually while probably screaming inside his head. He notes the architecture, mentions the locals calling it Al-Khazna, and then he leaves. That's it. No digging, no fanfare, no looting, just a mental snapshot and a very, very good poker face. Historians still argue whether Burckhardt really discovered Petra. After all, the duel were living here. They didn't need a European to tell them their front porch was a marvel. But his report, written later under candlelight in Cairo, put Petra on the Western map, literally. A quirky tidbit. Burckhardt's diary entry about Petra is astonishingly chill, just a few paragraphs. He was more concerned about running out of money and keeping up his disguise, which, to be fair, was a full-time job. He even faked religious knowledge convincingly enough to lead prayers. You've got to respect that level of dedication. As you walk through the sick tonight, you imagine being him. The thrill, the fear, the impossible pressure of pretending not to be dazzled by a wonder of the world. What restraint. If it were you, you'd be snapping selfies, live streaming, crying a little. But Burckhardt, he just kept walking. Eventually, he died young in Cairo, never knowing how famous Petra would become. His grave is quiet, modest, and yet his name is now tied forever to this place. Not because he claimed it, but because he respected it. He saw it, recorded it, and let it speak for itself. You reach the treasury again, still standing, still glowing faintly in the starlight. And you wonder, how many people passed it before Burckhardt? How many after? How many never even noticed? Petra doesn't just appear, you have to see it. Really see it, and some people never do. Burckhardt saw, but he wasn't the only one. You turn a corner and notice something most people miss, an inscription, faint near the base of a cliff. It's not Nabatean, it's in European script, A name carved into the wall, faint, scratched, forgotten. It reads JLB 1812. Real? A replica? A hopeful hoax? Historians still argue, but the legend lives. One last fringe theory. Some say Burckhardt found more than he admitted. That he may have seen the monastery. That he may have found inscriptions too sacred or too strange to write about. He was, after all, in disguise. And maybe even in danger. Maybe Petra kept a few of her secrets back, just in case. You take one last look around. The cliffs rise silent. The treasury doesn't blink. You tip your imaginary explorer hat to Sheikh Ibrahim ibn Abdallah, spy, scholar, adventurer. The man who walked through Petra pretending it wasn't the most magical thing he'd ever seen. You don't have to pretend. You just have to keep walking. Word count 9. Not out of fatigue, but out of something better. Presence. The kind that seeps in after dark when the cliffs feel taller and your thoughts get a little quieter. You don't need a guide for this part, just eyes that notice. Because Petra isn't just grand facades and sweeping staircases, it's also made of the little things, the tiny, overlooked details that remind you people didn't just build this place. They lived it. You're heading toward the quieter corners of the city now, where no massive temples stand, no famous tombs rise to greet the sun. Here, the rock tells subtler stories, ones carved by ordinary hands with very human intentions. You stop beside a small, almost forgotten ledge. It's chest height, maybe a little lower, with strange lines etched into the surface. At first glance, it's just weathering. But step closer and tilt your head in just the right way, and there it is, graffiti, ancient graffiti. Not the kind that says for a good time, call Haddad. This is older, simpler, names, symbols, a few half-finished figures. Some are graceful and carefully spaced. Others are chaotic, like they were carved in a rush. One reads, Abdu was here. Okay, not in English, but the Aramaic equivalent. You can almost feel the pride behind it. Or the boredom, or both. A quirky tidbit, Petra has one of the largest collections of ancient informal inscriptions in the Middle East. Think of it as the city's comment section, except it's 2,000 years old and chiseled with a dull blade instead of typed in all caps. You keep walking and spot something stranger, a pattern of small, evenly spaced square holes running horizontally along a wall. They're not deep, just about a knuckle's length. What were they for? Holding wooden beams? Decoration? Climbing footholds? Historians still argue. Some suggest they supported temporary structures, wooden porticos or awnings. Others think they might have been scaffolding points during the carving process. And a few insist they're symbolic, part of a forgotten ritual design. Petra is full of these architectural mysteries, spaces that make sense only in the moment they were built, and then lose their meaning as time sands the memory away. You pass a carved niche no taller than your knee. Inside, a shallow bowl, not for decoration. It was probably used for oil lamps or offerings. It's blackened with soot and lined with the faintest groove from years of hands placing, lighting, refilling. You run your fingers over the wall beside it, a faint indent. Maybe a seated figure once carved here. Maybe just a shoulder leaned too many times against the same spot. You come across one of the smaller tombs, its entrance no bigger than a modern-day bathroom. You duck inside and pause. On the walls, tiny chisel marks swarm like insects, hundreds of them, not polished or planned. Were they decoration? Did someone begin a carving and abandon it? Or did this chamber become a communal graffiti space? No one really knows. Here's a fringe theory. Some believe these little marks were made by mourners, visitors, each one a tribute, a memory, not unlike how we leave pebbles on gravestones today. If true, these chisel marks aren't vandalism. They're love, in stone. You step back into the open and find a stone block, square and oddly smooth. You sit. It could have been a foundation stone or a bench or part of something long collapsed, but right now, it's perfect. And that's when you notice something else. More writing. Tiny letters, half buried in shadow. Not Nabatean, not Greek, but Latin, carved cleanly, precisely in Roman script. Likely from after the annexation. It's not a grand proclamation, just a name. Lucius. No title, no date. It hits you differently than the others. Because Lucius didn't build Petra. He didn't rule it. He didn't carve its gods or trace its water channels. He just came and left a name. And now you're saying it 2,000 years later into the same wind that probably blew through his cloak. Lucius was here. So were you. You move on and find a path lined with worn steps, not grand ones, just enough to show that yes, people came this way often, probably every day, probably barefoot, probably carrying something heavy and muttering about it. There's something oddly touching about these subtle signs of life. The smooth door jambs, the low walls clearly meant to corral animals, the carved notches that held shelves. Petra may have temples, but it also had laundry. As you walk, you pass a spot that looks off. It's just a corner of a wall, but one of the stones is darker, cleaner, newer. That's because it is. Restoration. A quiet reminder that Petra isn't frozen in time. It's being carefully, cautiously maintained. Not rebuilt, just helped. Stone by stone. As if the city itself is being allowed to breathe again. You take one last look back at the inscriptions, the graffiti, the scratches no one celebrates in the museum brochures. And you realize something simple. Petra didn't leave a history of kings and battles carved in gold. It left this, the initials, the drawings, the mistakes, the forgotten names, the stuff that makes a city real. And in this light, with the cliffs watching silently, it's enough. You're back on level ground now, feet crunching softly along a gravel path that curves wide and familiar. There's something comforting in the silence. The shadows stretch longer. The cliffs lean in again, like the city's curling up for the night. But just as you think Petra might be ready to sleep, she gives you one more wink, bright, bold, and, well, cinematic. Because you're standing in front of that place, you know the one. A facade so famous it's etched into the collective memory of pop culture, thanks in no small part to a certain leather-jacketed archaeologist and his love for whips, ancient relics, and making it out just in time. Welcome to Petra, as seen in the movies. Specifically, in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where the treasury starred as the hidden temple guarding the Holy Grail. And even though the inside scenes were filmed elsewhere, sorry to crush your dreams, the exterior shot became iconic. Millions saw it, millions gasped, and suddenly Petra wasn't just a forgotten city. It was famous. You stand there right where Indy did. No boulders rolling, no Nazis to outsmart, no Grail Knight handing out life advice, just you, the stone, and the memory of John Williams' soundtrack soaring somewhere in your imagination. A quirky tidbit? After the movie's release in 1989, tourism to Petra exploded. Locals say visitors doubled almost overnight. People came wearing fedoras. Some even brought whips. For the record, don't do that. Petra's cliffs deserve your respect, not your cosplay. You keep walking, and the facade fades behind you, but its influence doesn't. You begin to notice other places where Petra pops up in pop culture. It's been in video games, graphic novels, fashion campaigns, even the Transformers fought near it once. Let's pretend that one didn't happen. Historians still argue whether Petra's pop fame helps or harms it. On one hand, the exposure brought awareness, funding, and global love. On the other, popularity can be a double-edged sword. More visitors mean more wear, more trash, more selfies taken while standing on sacred stone. Don't be that person. You arrive now at one of Petra's modern visitor platforms, a wide, flat space overlooking a carved amphitheater that's often used in brochures but rarely gets the same love as the treasury or monastery. It's quieter, underrated, and kind of perfect. You sit on a low ledge and sip water from your bottle. Plastic, not goatskin, thankfully. A small group nearby is taking pictures, posing dramatically. A guide waves his flashlight like a conductor, pointing out features in the cliff face. And for a moment, Petra doesn't feel ancient. It feels alive, not as a ruin, but as a stage, a backdrop, a personality. Because that's what happens when a city becomes famous. It shifts, it adapts, it learns to perform. But here's the deeper truth. Petra isn't just a movie set, or a bucket list stop, or a gorgeous Instagram frame. It's a city that earned every bit of that awe. It's got the receipts, carved in stone. You walk down into the theater, climbing over the steps carved straight into the mountain. No mortar, no bricks. Just Petra, performing for its own people long before the cameras arrived. This amphitheater wasn't Roman originally, though the Romans expanded it. It was Nabatean from the start, built for gatherings, ceremonies, maybe political meetings, maybe just entertainment. Imagine music echoing here. Chants, debates, laughter. You close your eyes. The echoes don't take long to return. It's no wonder filmmakers fell in love with this place. Petra knows how to frame a scene. The lighting is dramatic at every hour. The natural acoustics are perfect. The colors shift with the sun, giving you a new look every time you turn around. Eat your heart out, Hollywood. But with fame comes responsibility. The Jordanian government and international conservation teams have been working for decades to balance tourism with preservation. Paths are rerouted, signs posted, guards stationed, and yet erosion continues. Graffiti happens. Even now, someone somewhere is probably trying to climb something they shouldn't. It's hard to protect a city that's too beautiful, too beloved, too accessible. There's an old local saying, "The stone listens longer than the wind speaks." It means Petra remembers. Every voice, every footstep, every careless touch, and every moment of wonder. You glance up at the cliffs. Somewhere behind them is a Nabatean carving no one has seen in years. Somewhere under your feet might be an inscription still waiting to be uncovered. And somewhere in a movie theater years ago, someone saw Petra for the first time and said, "That place can't be real." But you're here. You know better. Petra doesn't need movie magic. She is magic. And she'll outlast every lens, every actor, every credit roll. You get up, stretch your legs, and head back down the path. The stars are still watching, the cliffs still glowing faintly in the starlight. And somewhere behind you, Indiana Jones is still dashing into the shadows. You've walked through temples, climbed to sacrifices, lit candles with ghosts, and now the desert is wrapping Petra in its final hush. But there's one more story, tucked not in stone, but in symbols. Shapes, marks that whisper from cliff walls with stubborn permanence. You're walking into Petra's world of art, not just the big flashy facades, but the subtle messages the Nabateans left behind. Their language, their symbols, their voice, still echoing. First up, the Nabatean script. It's older than Arabic, though it's also a kind of ancestor to it. It flows from right to left in looping, elegant forms. And the strangest part? The Nabateans weren't big on showing off their writing in huge monuments. You have to look closely, really closely. You stop beside a sun-warmed stone slab, barely waist high, with a set of faded lines scratched into it. They look like graffiti, but they're not. This is a proper inscription, probably commemorating a building or an offering. The letters curl and fade into the stone like smoke that never finished rising. There's something magical about it, like a secret language left for no one and everyone. A quirky detail. Nabatean script used very few vowels, which makes deciphering ancient messages a bit like trying to read HBB and assuming it's either a celebration or a warning. Scholars still argue over some inscriptions. A name? A price? A prayer? Could be any or all three. And here's where it gets cooler. The Nabateans didn't just write in their own script. They borrowed from Aramaic, from Greek, sometimes even mixing languages in the same inscription. It was a multilingual, multi-faith empire. Traders, remember? They adapted to whoever walked through their gates. That's not confusion. It's survival. You walk deeper into a cliff-lined path where the walls begin to rise again. This time, you're looking for something different, the carved gods. They don't jump out at you like in Egyptian temples or Greek statues. They hide, peek, blend. Take Dushara, the main Nabatean deity. You'd think he'd have a big old statue, maybe holding a thunderbolt or sitting on a throne. Nope. Dushara is usually represented as a block of stone. That's it, a squared, smooth-edged pillar. No face, no hands, no dramatic poses. Why? Historians still argue. Some say it was a form of aniconism, avoiding the human form in religious imagery. Others think it was deliberate mystery, making the god a concept rather than a person. Either way, the result is the same. Dushara's watching but not speaking, and certainly not smiling. You find one of these blocks now tucked into a natural alcove. It's maybe shoulder high, almost easy to miss. There are offerings etched nearby, palms, animals, simple geometric patterns. No instructions, no commandments, just the suggestion of reverence. You touch the stone gently. It's warm. It feels blank, but in a way that invites meaning. The kind of silence that asks a question instead of answering it. Next to Dushara's symbol, you find something even stranger. A figure carved into the wall, arms raised, face barely visible. A woman, possibly. The goddess Al-Uzza? She was popular too, maybe even more so among traders. Her domain was protection, fertility, and war. Basically, she handled the customer service side of things. Another quirky fact, Some believe the Nabateans were flexible with their deities' identities, that Dushara may have been blended with Dionysus or Zeus in later periods. Religious syncretism, they call it, when cultures mash gods together like playlist remixes. You keep moving, and now you're watching the walls more closely. Petra is full of biddles, small, abstract representations of divine presence. They're not elaborate, usually just rectangular carvings with little ornamentation, but once you start noticing them, you see them everywhere. In tombs, along trails, above doorways, like divine post-its. God is here. Please wipe your sandals. And then something unexpected. A lion, not a cartoon lion, a muscular stylized carving along a water spout, teeth slightly bared. This one's symbolic too, possibly tied to Al-Uzza, who was sometimes associated with lions. Or maybe it's just a guardian figure. Either way, you wouldn't want to argue with it. Above the lion, a star-shaped carving, possibly astrological. The Nabateans paid attention to the skies, that much is clear. Certain tombs and sacred sites align with solstices and equinoxes, and while Petra wasn't a giant observatory, it knew the sky mattered. A fringe theory? Some scholars believe Petra's temples and monuments were laid out according to celestial patterns, with specific gods tied to specific stars or planets. There's even speculation that Dushara's unadorned block form reflects a celestial body, like a star too bright to look at directly. You pause again and stare at the cliff face. It's covered in what looks like random dots. But they're not random. They're cupules, small, round indentations carved into the rock, sometimes in clusters. No one knows exactly what they meant. They show up in other ancient sites too, India, Scandinavia, North Africa. But here in Petra, they feel deliberate, like ancient braille, or musical notes on stone. You trace your fingers over them, smooth, cool. They don't tell you anything outright, but they don't have to. Art isn't always meant to be read. Sometimes it's meant to be felt. And Petra's art is everywhere once you know where to look. It's in the geometry of the door frames, the hidden chambers with carved vines, the sunbursts etched above tombs like sandstone fireworks. It's in the restraint. No clutter, no overcrowding, just form, line, balance. You sit down beneath one of these designs, watching as the moonlight traces the carvings. The figures flicker in and out of visibility, like they're slipping between worlds. Petra didn't paint its walls. It didn't gild its gods. It carved and let time do the rest. And as you sit there, silent, present, you realize something wonderful. This city has been talking the whole time. You just had to listen with your eyes. You rise slowly from your seat beneath the ancient carvings, joints creaking just a little. Petra is generous with her wisdom, but she makes you earn it with every step. The cliffs are dark now, and the moon has taken over the lighting design, casting soft silver across every surface. You're nearly at the end of the city's winding path, but Petra has one last curve to offer, one that has nothing to do with stone and everything to do with water. Yes, water. You've heard about it all through this journey. Cisterns, channels, aqueducts. But now you're going to walk it. Because without water, Petra would never have existed. Not for a year. Not for a week. You're standing beside a narrow channel carved directly into the canyon wall. It looks small, barely wide enough for a loaf of bread, but this groove once carried the lifeblood of an entire civilization. Petra's water system is one of the most astonishing feats of engineering in the ancient world. While the Romans had aqueducts and the Egyptians had the Nile, the Nabateans had almost nothing. Just a few seasonal streams, flash floods, and a lot of desert. So they got clever. They turned cliffs into collection systems, cisterns into coolers. They mapped every natural water source within miles and then bent the landscape to bring it home. The channel you're following now, worn smooth by centuries, is part of that system. It once caught runoff from the mountains, guiding it gently toward the city's storage tanks. They built dams to slow floods. They carved silt traps to clean water naturally. They made ceramic pipes, joined with bitumen to stop leaks. A quirky little fact? Some of Petra's underground water channels were hidden so well that archaeologists didn't even find them until the 1990s. Turns out, the Nabateans weren't just architects. They were plumbers with style. You keep walking beside the channel, watching it disappear into a dark crevice. It's bone dry now, but the echo of its past lingers. You imagine the sound of water rushing, the splash of jars being filled, the laughter of children dipping their fingers in during the hottest days of summer. And yes, people bathed in Petra. There were public bathhouses, likely inspired by Greco-Roman design, but adapted for desert efficiency. You pass the remains of one now, its low walls forming a neat rectangle in the sand. You can almost see the steam rising, the water glinting under lantern light. Historians still argue how much of Petra's water system was original and how much was upgraded by the Romans after annexation. But what's clear is that the Nabateans laid the groundwork. Literally, they knew their environment and manipulated it with surgical precision. You reach a small reservoir now, one of many. It's carved into the rock like a hidden pool, rimmed with a lip to prevent overflow. It could have stored thousands of gallons. Water was precious here. It wasn't wasted. It wasn't decorative. It was sacred. And that's something Petra teaches in every drop. Luxury isn't gold. It's water in the desert. You sit beside the reservoir and let that sink in. The wind is dry, cool. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the gurgle of a distant spring, the sound of jugs knocking against each other, the slow, content sigh of someone taking the first sip after a long walk. A fringe theory? Some believe the placement of Petra's most sacred sites, like the high place of sacrifice, was chosen not just for visibility or grandeur, but because of water proximity, that the gods were honored where water gathered. Because to worship water in a desert is to worship survival itself. You lean back against the stone. Even without water, the reservoir feels alive. And here's a final twist. Some of Petra's water system still works. During heavy rains, the channels fill. The dams divert floods, the sediment basins catch the debris, and the old cisterns, they hold. 2,000 years later, the system still functions. You blink. That's not history. That's genius. As you get up and walk again, you pass a final stretch of piping. Some of it's been re-excavated, some of it's still buried. But the message is clear. Petra didn't survive despite its harsh environment. It mastered it, and it left clues behind, in stone and silence. A smooth-worn lip of a channel, a patch of darker rock where water once flowed, a rusted bucket, maybe modern, maybe older, left beside a carved well. Each one says, we built, we lasted. You leave the water channel behind now and rejoin the main path. The cliffs close in gently on either side, and you realize this has always been the real miracle of Petra. Not just that it was carved, not just that it was hidden, but that it worked, it functioned. For centuries, a city in the desert with no river and no rain, and it thrived. And somehow all of that wonder began with a single drop. You've made it. The path has looped. The cliffs have quieted, and Petra, this ancient, crumbling, still breathing marvel, has shared her last few secrets. You pause, standing at the edge of where the city finally gives way to open desert again. Behind you, canyons, tombs, gods without faces, cisterns carved from cliff. In front of you, the vast hush of the Jordanian night. But before you go, Petra offers one last story, not carved in stone or sung in any temple. It's the story of rediscovery, not Burckhardt's rediscovery. Because let's be honest, when you first heard of Petra, you thought of the treasury, right? The big, glowing facade. Maybe camels, maybe a hat-tipping adventurer diving through collapsing doors. But now you've seen so much more. You've wandered through ritual altars, deciphered mysterious block gods, sat in bathhouse ruins, and read messages scratched into sandstone by a person named Lucius. You've seen where people lived, not just where they were buried, where they ate, argued, fetched water, and fell in love. You've walked through a city that refused to die. A quirky detail to carry with you. Locals say that sometimes, especially in spring when the desert blooms, you can still smell the faintest hint of Nabatean incense wafting from cracks in the rock. Sandalwood, myrrh, a ghost of the spice trade, a phantom offering. Is it real? Is it memory? Historians still argue, but that's the beautiful thing about Petra. She lets you decide. You stroll toward the final bend in the canyon, where the cliffs will fall away and the sky will stretch open again. But your steps are slower now. You keep turning back, looking over your shoulder, not because you're lost, but because you don't want to leave. Not really. And here comes the wind down. You find a flat rock, sit, breathe. The stone beneath you is warm from the day's sun, now slowly cooling under starlight. The air is gentler, the silence deeper, even the desert seems to exhale. You lie back. The sky above Petra is an ocean of stars now, clear, infinite. You spot Orion, maybe Venus, maybe something you can't name but feel all the same. The cliffs around you blur into shadow, the tombs sleep, the gods withdraw. And Petra? She's still listening. You let your thoughts slow, let your breathing lengthen. Your body sinks a little more into the warm curve of stone. Even your memories soften, melting into dream. Footsteps echo in your head, not real ones, ghost steps, of people long gone, of caravans, of whispered prayers, of a child skipping down temple stairs, of a shepherd humming a tune no one ever wrote down. Petra is fading now, gently like a candle burning low. You are safe here, held, hushed, cradled in a city that knew how to survive. You close your eyes, and the last thing you feel is not the cold. It's the stone beneath you, quiet, steady, old, and the soft desert wind brushing past your face like a lullaby you almost remember.